Good morning, everybody. I'm glad you're here. And one other person here from the State Board of Missions is Beth Edfeld, and she is our ministry assistant in Cooperative Program and Church Financial Resources Office. And so I feel sorry for Beth. Beth has a tough assignment, and that is that when I do these things, she's got to listen to me. And see, y'all just got to do it one time, and she's got to do it a bunch of times. So I do feel sorry for her in that part of the assignment. But what she's doing is that we have 7 people online today, and so she's monitoring that. And those of you who are online, welcome. But also, you may type in a question if you're online, and Beth is going to monitor those questions and feed them to me as you do that, and we'll keep on moving with the questions. Now, that's part of the thing for today. Is you ask any question you want to today, and we'll see if we can answer it. But we want today to be about you and your church and your questions, and to try to give you the best help that we possibly can. So if you don't ask questions, it's not a very good day. And I want it to be a good day. So today we're going to use the materials that you find in your packet. And first thing I want to mention is my card is right here. You've got all my numbers and email and contact information, but it's also got my cell phone number. And some of you heard me talking. I am semi-retired, have been for the last 6 years, and I work mostly from home. And so if you call the office number and I'm home instead of being here, then it's going to ring my cell phone, and you'll get me that way. And so you've got both. If you want to just call my cell phone direct, that's okay too. You've got my cell phone listed there too. We're going to go through these materials somewhat. Not every material that you have before you, but a lot of these, and we will go through this personnel booklet a pretty good bit. But you also have the salary study, and this one says 24-25. The study is done during the even numbered years. So the last study that was done was in 2024. And this study is done by Guidestone and by the state conventions. And then Lifeway tabulates the results. And then Mickey Crawford in the computer office helps us to put these tables together so that we have a version for Alabama. And you've got this in front of you. For the odd number years, 25 is an odd number year. So what we do during that year is we apply the cost of living adjustment from the government, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we apply that cost of living adjustment. So it's like a 2.3% cost of living adjustment. So it's the same basic stats, but just with the cost of living adjustment applied to it. And that one is online now. If you go to, and you might want to write down, well, it's actually here, alsbom.org/CCS. I think it's big on the last page, alsbom.org/CCS. And there you'll find really big on the last page. And there you'll find the salary study. And the one that is there now is the current version, which is, it's almost identical, but just with the 2.3% cost of living adjustment added to these figures. Starting in January, there'll be a new study being done in 2026. I hope that your church will participate in that study. The more people we can get involved in that study, the better data we will have, and the better study it will be. And so please do help us out with that. All the data is kept totally confidential. I don't have a clue how much anybody makes, at all. It's all tabulated together so that it's grouped together, and and so you don't see individual salaries or anything like that. And so the individual salaries are kept very private. But this is a very good tool, and it's a very good tool for you, as many of you are on the personnel committee for your church. How many of y'all are on the personnel committee or team or whatever at your church? Okay, bunch of you. How many of you are on staff at your church, an administrative role? Wow, bunch of you. Yeah, good. I'm glad you're here. So this is a good resource for your team. And now, all this is an average. That's all it is. It's not a recommendation for your church. It's just an average of what's been reported to us. Now, also at that same website, you can look at the national study. And it's the same group of data. And we've just pulled out for Alabama, but the national study, you can look at all states or other states or whatever's you would like, and you can get the same kind of information. Sometimes if you've got a position that maybe there's not much Alabama data for, let's say a recreation minister in a small church that you don't see very many of those, then you can go to all states and see what the national average is. And I'll tell you, Alabama pays a little bit better in terms of Southern Baptist churches. Alabama pays a little bit better than average. Mississippi and Louisiana pay a little less. Georgia pays a little more. And so you can, on average, I'm talking about average. That's what we're talking about here. But this can be a really good resource for you. All right, so 26, be sure and help your church to participate in that study. Won't take you very long. It's generally done online, but we do, for smaller churches, we do send out a paper copy that if you can't do the computer thing, or don't want to do the computer thing, a smaller church can just send that in to us and we'll enter the data. All right? Any questions about that? All right. Let's go to this personnel book, and we're going to open it up and get started. We're going to cover the first part of the book. Second part of the book has a lot of just appendix and resources and a sample personnel policy and things of that nature. So let's get started. So if you are part of a committee or your staff and you work with the committee, here's some of those things that are basic roles that you have as team members, and that would be employment procedures, salary plans, personnel benefits, personnel services, legal requirements, and an advisory role. So the qualifications of committee members would be that you would be objective, who can cooperate, communicate, make decisions, seeking God's will, that you represent the church to the staff and the staff to the church, that you represent both to each other. You implement those policies and procedures. You act as a sympathetic sounding board for the church staff, the church and the staff. Now, there's really no other person or team assigned with that job. So you need to hear the staff out some. And maybe if there's some complaint, that you hear them as well as hear church members, because there might not be anybody else for them to really go to. Some of what I'm going to say today is opinion, and some of it's just my opinion, and every church does it differently. So you'll see that. Demonstrate and encourage a loving, caring relationship between staff members, committee members, and church. Your duties that you will look at: do we need additional staff? You might be creating a position for additional staff. You might be replacing some staff member and working through that. You might be recruiting and interviewing and being involved in that. You may be developing a salary program and recommended personnel policies and procedures, and then that you keep them up to date on legal requirements and things like that. And then provide and encourage staff participation in local and state denominational activities. So, section 2, page 6, how much staff do we need? And this really, it varies a lot from one church to another. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I want to ask you about your examples. So, first thing we do is we ask about, well, what is getting done? What's not getting done? Are we assimilating new people? Are we assimilating new people? Do we have people headed out the back door at our church? And our pastor the other day, he said, we do have a problem with, we're reaching a lot of people, we really are, but we do have some people headed out the back door, and we're going to have to work on that. So are we assimilating new people? And one thing that he says a lot, and I've heard it from other people, but I don't think anybody says it more often and more clearly than he does, is he says, if you don't have a close personal friend or friends in this church in 6 months, you'll be gone. You'll be gone. And what he is talking about with that is you've got to be in a small group. Now at our church, we've got a small building and a larger congregation, so we only have room for Sunday school, for preschool, children, and youth. No, we don't have room for the youth. They meet on Wednesday night. So just preschool and children. And so we have our preschool and children on Sunday morning. Youth and adults meet other times and elsewhere in some cases. Lynette and I have a small group that meet in our home on Monday night. Small group of adults. We teach, and then we teach preschool, Sunday school on Sunday morning. So anyway, we don't have a lot of space, and so that can be a problem. It can be a problem, and you've got to get into your small group or your Sunday school or however your church does it. You've got to be part of that to really be known and to know others and to be assimilated. Are we developing leadership? Are we experiencing church growth? Are we reaching people for Christ? Things. So those are some questions for you to be asking. Now, historically, there were a lot fewer staff than probably since the 50s and 60s. So in the 1960s, churches had about one full-time paid pastor for every 500 people in attendance. Wow, that's a lot of people. And as I think about when I was a boy in the 50s, that was about right. I went to a church that at that time ran about 1,200 in Sunday school, and we only had a couple of ministerial staff people. That was all that we had. That church today has a lot more staff, and today, according to Tom Rayner, that ratio has dropped to about 1 to 76, about one staff member per 76 people in attendance. So how much ministerial staff do we need? And growth is more probable with 100 to 1 or lower, and plateau and decline are more probable with greater number of people per staff member. Now, this was talking about membership. Let's go on to the one about attendance. So consider the age of your church, consider the age and family makeup. What do you have young families? Do you have older families? What's going on? And consider the number of ministries and programs in the church in terms of what you need in terms of ministerial staff. So I'm going to emphasize this chart in your book that's by attendance. Not the one, I'm not going to emphasize the one by membership. To me, membership is, when you look at lots of churches, membership is almost meaningless, because we've got churches that have 1,000 members and 100 in attendance, and vice versa. Vice versa would be a pretty good problem to have 100 members. Well, no, that would have its own problems if you had 100 members and 1,000 in attendance, because the other 900 probably are not very devoted to, leading and giving and those kind of things. But anyway, membership is not tremendously meaningful in terms of, you might have a large membership but not that many people coming. So I like to look at it by attendance, because that does give you a better gauge. So that you should have one additional full-time program staff person at 200. Now, that's in addition to pastor and the music minister. Okay, so at 200, you're going to have three in attendance. You're going to have three full-time staff people, or its equivalent. At 300, you're going to have 4 people, or 4 full-time, or its equivalent, and so forth. And so the recent study is that there's been 1 for every 76 persons in average weekly attendance. Now, that's including pastor and worship leader. So if we have an attendance of 200, we're going to divide that by, that's going to be less than 3 people. Well, this would indicate 3 people, and that 1 to 76 would indicate a little less than 3 full-time equivalents. So maybe one of those people is part-time. But these two charts kind of coincide with one another. And so that was a recent study, more recent study. And then the benchmark, though, is 40 to 60% of your budget being spent on compensation, on staff, on the total of what you spend on staff. Now, of course, that includes custodial staff, ministerial assistants, everybody on staff, somewhere between 40 and 60% spent on staff. And you really can't, when you get 60% spent on staff, that's kind of pushing the limits of things. For example, let's just make up a budget here. If we're going to spend 10% on missions, and I'm just making this up, and I'm using round figures here, but if we're going to spend 10% on missions, and I'd encourage you to do more than that, but 10% on missions, and then if we spent 50% on staff, total staff, that's 60% of our budget. And then if we spent 20% on our facilities, 20% is typical. Now there, you're thinking about lights and water and all your bills and cleaning and insurance and all that kind of stuff. So if you spent 20% on your buildings, and we've spent 60 plus 20 is 80, and so you've only got a little bit left over for all of your program ministries, your Bible study, your youth ministry, your children's ministry, your music ministry, senior adult ministry, all those things. And so when you get more than 50% spent on staff, then that's going to squeeze something else. Your building costs are pretty fixed. until the air conditioner goes out. And so you're going to squeeze there, and it's going to usually end up in squeezing the program ministries of your church. So we kind of have a limit as to what we can do staff wise, staff budget wise. All right, so page 7, how many staff members do we need? We need fewer if it's a younger church, and younger in terms of facilities, younger in church of age. Mainly this is talking about age group of the people. Do you have a lot more young adults? Do you have large debt? Well, then you can't have a lot of staff because you've got a large debt, so it'd be fewer. Few senior adults, and vice versa on the other side of that chart. If you've got more senior adults, you're going to need more staff because you're going to have more needs. And also, unfortunately, I've got some friends in some churches that have a lot of older members that they do a lot of funerals. You're going to have a younger church and fewer deaths, and then also you need fewer staff if it's built around the ministry of the pastor. You need more staff if it's an older church, no debt, and you've got that opportunity to have more staff. Pluralistic membership and less traditional families, then we need more staff. So let's see how that plays out. Well, I thought I put that in there. Okay, I'm thinking about 2 churches, and these are 2 churches that my church that I attend now, and my church that I still call my church that was here in Montgomery. And so the church that I attend now, well, let me start with the one in Montgomery. So right now there are 6 full-time staff members. They run about 500 in Sunday school or worship. And there are 6 full-time ministry staff positions. I'm including the pastor. I'm including all of them. And so there are 6, and they're running about 500 in attendance. The church that I attend in Huntsville, my church in Huntsville, and you know, I still call that one my church because we were there 40 years, and but my church in Huntsville, we've been there 5 years, and we only have 2 full-time staff positions, only 2, and we're running about 600. But we have 4 part-time people. I'm talking about ministers. So maybe that's the equivalent of 2 full-time, maybe. I'm not sure if they even work that many hours. So we have about 4 times the full-time equivalent staff person for about 600 in attendance. So you see, in Huntsville, we're a little bit understaffed. Now, let's just see how that holds out. What about your church? Anybody have a church that you want to report kind of how many you have, or anybody have a church that's sort of real different than those 2 stats? Yes, sir.
Westview and we have, let me count them right now, make sure. 3 full-time staff, on the verge of getting a new senior pastor.
Okay.
And we're looking at turning the minister of music from part-time to full-time after the new senior pastor comes on. So that would add 1 more spot, and we run around 300.
Okay.
Attendance.
So you're going to have 4 full-time equivalent? Okay. All right. And running about 300.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay.
No, we're big. We have about 20 ministers and 18. We have 17, 18 ministers. And then we have our attendance is 2,800, 2,500, something like that, 24, 2,500.
So you have fewer ministers per 100 attendees, right?
Roughly.
Yeah, and that would be typical of a larger church. Yeah. Okay, anybody else want to tell about what you have in your church?
Not
Yes,
to
sir.
talk well, but we have about 250, roughly 200 to 250 every Sunday.
Okay,
We have 3 full-time ministers and a part-time children's ministry person and an office staff. That's it.
all right, that's good. That's good. So these numbers that we're talking about, these are just sort of a rule of thumb. And every church does it differently. Every church has different situations. And you may want to add staff, and you may want to creatively add staff, but be careful of the average money spent on total staff. I'm talking about everybody. Average is 47%, and but it's typical for a lot of churches to be about right at the 50% mark on what they're spending on staff. And obviously, there are factors that enter into that. If you have debt, you're going to struggle to do that. You might have to spend less on staff. So what positions do we need? And we need to be careful about this, because in the 1950s, some cities had 30% youth. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? We had the baby boomers, and so by the 50s, they were getting into their teenage years, and so I'm a boomer. And I was a teenager in the 60s. And so you had as many as 30% youth. Now, typically, today, what I see in a lot of churches is about 10% children and about 10% youth. Somewhere in that ballpark. It might be 10, might be 12, but somewhere in that ballpark is what I typically see in a church, about in terms of children and youth, maybe 10% youth, but think about 30% youth. So, so your churches, that was when the youth ministers came along, and when youth ministry became a big deal in our churches. And it was so funny, our church, I went to First Baptist Longview, Texas, and we bought when I was a youth, we bought this it was a dry cleaning building. It was a dry cleaners, had a concrete floor, big facility, just big open space, and they basically made a skating rink out of it, and we had some classroom space also, but that was the youth building. And it was so funny, that was when there was a lot of rock music, and at our church, we did fellowships where there was a pretty good bit of that, and the parents, our church, in terms of worship, was pretty formal, but in the youth building, as long as the adults didn't hear it, they didn't care, and it's sort of like, y'all do your own thing, and we're fine with that. So, but I just can't imagine having 30% youth just by the population. That would be really remarkable. Now, that's not the case today. And in many of our churches, I go into some of our churches and there are very few youth. Now, I go into some of our churches and there's a good number. But we got into this pattern of seeing what's going on in other churches. And, they've got a youth minister, so we've got to have a youth ministry. And we're not doing it much these days, but for a long time, the church down the street has a Family Life Center, so we've got to have a Family Life Center. And most of those churches, now some of them did a very good job with their Family Life Center and with recreation ministry, and those that did a good job with it typically hired someone who was a recreation minister to make sure that we had good things going on in the Family Life Center. But a lot of churches thought, well, if we just have a family life center, we're going to reach people, and that's not going to do it. And many of those family life centers are sitting today because they never were properly used. So what I'm saying in this today is that today there's only 8 to 10% youth, about 12% children, and maybe some of our churches, we don't need a youth minister. Maybe we need a part-time youth minister, and in addition to that, a part-time senior adult minister or whatever. We need to look at our needs, and we need to look at our needs honestly, not just do a youth ministry because we've always. Now, I think we should, even if we've only got. I knew one youth minister that had 6 in his youth group, and he was part-time, obviously. But he did a great job, and he did a good job and reached some other kids. But so we need a youth ministry, but we might not need total full-time youth ministry when we've got this other situation going on. And maybe we need a full-time children's minister and a part-time youth minister. So look at your needs, look at your situation, and don't just do your staff because we've always done it that way. That's the main point. And we have typically about 6% preschool. All right, so don't make assumptions based on past needs that you had as a church. And here's where I put in about the example. That was our church here in Montgomery. Okay, now, all right. So look at your needs, look at your church and its vision and its dreams of what we want to do and what's not being done, but also look at our people being assimilated into the life and ministry of our church. I told you that about our pastor saying that we're having some people go out the back door. Well, we do have a young church. We do have a very exciting ministry, very good church. And we do have people getting involved in some kind of service, whether they're teaching Sunday school or on the praise team or involved in the welcome ministry and those kinds of things. We do have a very high ratio of people who are serving. It's not the 80-20 rule, but we do have a high ratio, but we're still having some people who are going out the back. And I think, personally, we need a little bit more staff to get that job done. So see what we need. All right, now ministry assistants, and there have been through the years 3 different ways of doing it, and I don't see the first one hardly at all anymore. Traditional assistant was a one-to-one relationship with a minister. And the only thing that I see in that relationship these days is a pastor. Pastor often has his own ministry assistant. But everybody else is got two ministerial staff people and 1 ministry assistant is what's often typical. It's so funny, here at the State Board of Missions, probably 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, there was a 1-to-1 ratio. And can you imagine that, Beth? There was a 1-to-1 ratio, and when State Board of Missions first had computers, the ministers, they were told, don't touch it. Isn't that weird compared to what we do today? And so through the years, we have often where 1 ministry assistant serves 2 ministers, and that's very common. I did, when I served at Heritage Baptist here in the Montgomery area, I did discipleship and some administration, and I did have a ministry assistant that was assigned to me, but she also did all the records and all the Sunday school records and all the everything else. So, like everything else related to those kind of records. So I really only had a part-time person to do the work that I actually had. So most of the time it's blended. At the church where I go in Huntsville nowadays, we have one person part-time that does bookkeeping, and we have one person not quite full-time, mostly probably about 3/4 time, who is the ministry assistant for the whole church. And that's it. And like I said, we've got basically 4 full-time minister staff equivalents, including the pastor. Pastor and minister of music are full-time. We got 4 other part-time, equaling about 4 full-time equivalents. So for one ministry assistant. And now, how's that getting done? How does it get done? Any of your churches have a situation like that? Okay, one of the ways that it's getting done is there's just no mail. No mail. Hardly any printed material. There is a little thing that they hand you on Sunday morning, and it's got an envelope. You can put money in it. It's got your prayer request. You can put your prayer request in it. It's got your notes for taking notes. It's got everything in this one little piece. And other than that, there is no printed material whatsoever at our church. We've been there 5 years. I have only received one piece of mail in 5 years. And that was a personal handwritten thank you note from the pastor that he did. But that's it. We're just not doing mail like now. The church that I served for so many years, we had all kinds of mail going out. We had the newsletter, which was printed, going out by mail. We had all this stuff going out and printed, and so and I suspect that they're not doing as much as they used to be doing. But it's just a real difference, and there are ways to do it. But it's just different these days. How many of y'all have a printed newsletter that's sent out? Okay, y'all
We
do?
have one, but I don't think they mail them out to anybody but the homebound.
Okay. They just hand them out?
I think they mail those, and then they have them sent out on the tables.
Okay.
Or you can look at it online.
All right, good deal. How many of y'all have some kind of printed newsletter that's handed out? Okay, bunch. And how many of y'all have just it's online? It's sent out that way. Okay. All right. So things are changing, and you and I need to kind of think about how things are changing. In that we're not mailing things as much. We're not doing printed materials as much as we used to. And just think about those differences. All right. Now, about the money spent on staff, when the attendance was less than 50 in attendance, the typical church spent 44% of their budget. When the attendance was 250 or more, they spent 50% of their budget. That was the average. And so then you see the averages in 2022 and 2018. But 47% was the average spend in 2006. So that 47-50% range, that sort of thing is very typical and has been an average for a long time. And your church may do differently. Our church has about 500 to 600 in attendance, And we don't owe a dime. We're in a small building. We're in a building that's for about 200. And we are about to merge with another church. They've got a building for about 600 and about 60 in attendance. We've got about 600 in attendance and about a building for, a couple of hundred. So we're going to merge and we're going to move. It's going to be really something I've never seen before. We've always moved into the suburbs and into wherever the growth factor was for the town that we were in and all that stuff. And we're charging straight back into the underserved. And it's really going to be a very unusual merger, but it is a big old building that we will fix up and utilize, and by the time it's all over, we won't owe a dime. And that, to me, that's refreshing. My church here in Montgomery, we had 3 building projects while I was there, and and got wonderful facilities, tremendous, but that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and a lot of money. So churches are thinking differently these days. All right, so what about salaries? Think also about median household income. And the median household income in Madison and Limestone County is $113,000 now. Wow. It just seems like no time ago the median household income was about 50 to 60,000. But the average in Alabama is average median family income today is $82,500 in Alabama today. So we need to think about that. And now this booklet, and the booklet, I sort of took it and edited it and redid some things, but you'll see some information here about a staff salary program where you have, and that a lot of that came from Jim Swedenberg. If you remember Jim Swedenberg, he's retired. He's retired now, but he advocated a plan, and so your plan would be that you would have ministers. Pastor would be at this level. That you would have your other ministers who are at a level that, say, your administrator, your discipleship pastor, your associate pastor, those pastors would be, or ministers, whatever you call them, those ministers would be about 75% of what the pastor made. And then you would have youth minister, children's minister, people like that who would make, say, about 75% of that. So you've got different levels there, and he recommended a plan. And so you may want to, some of our larger churches might want to get into a plan like that. I have seen some churches that have their pay out of whack. That's a technical term. That I've seen some churches do it in a very odd way, and such that it causes some other problems. And I've seen some ministers who they got more pay than was typical for them in that position at that time, and they really couldn't move. It made it almost impossible for them to move to another church. So it is good to have a plan and to think about those things. More of our smaller churches, and when I say smaller, I'm talking about running 200 to 400 to 500 people. That's not a small church. Did y'all realize that? Many of you are thinking we're in a medium-sized church. But in Alabama, about a third of our churches are under 50 in attendance. About a third of our churches are 50 to 99. The top third of our churches run 100 and up. So y'all are in big churches. Y'all are in really big churches. So at running 200, you might not have a formal salary plan. Running 2,800, you likely do have a formal kind of salary plan. All right. Now, we need to understand what is salary. And there is something that still goes on in our churches today. It's called the lump sum or package. We offered a package to our pastor, and you need to be careful about your terminology. That's not good terminology these days. So you want to think in terms, your salary is salary and housing. Salary and housing. And you don't want to do the lump sum anymore. We used to do, and still very, very often, a church will say, here's X number of dollars, you divide it up any way you want to. Does that sound familiar? It is very familiar. And you shouldn't be doing that. You should be providing salary, which becomes salary and housing, and then you should be providing benefits. And then the third category is you need to be reimbursing for business expenses. And so the package approach should be avoided. So there's 3 areas. This is on page 24 of your book. I know we've kind of moved ahead on that, but there's 3 areas. Salary and housing, protection benefits, and ministerial expenses. And so that's the way you need to divide your, and really the salary is, we need to talk in terms of salary and housing. And then we need to provide benefits to everybody that as we can. Even our bivocational churches, on average, provide about $1,500 in actual benefits. So I'm talking about provided by the church. And then as you move up to larger churches, they're providing a lot more in terms of benefits than that. The larger churches are providing insurance and medical insurance, and they're providing disability insurance, and they're providing retirement contributions and those kind of things. But so you have a system of salary and benefits, and these benefits are something that that the best way for you to do it is for you to decide what your church is going to do, and you do that by policy. These are the benefits that we provide. Now let's talk salary. All right. So doing it right costs the church nothing, and doing it wrong costs the minister a lot in taxes, especially these days. Especially these days, page 24. So salary and housing that's the salary part, but then benefits, protection benefits would be those insurance and disability and medical and contributions into the retirement plan, and then expenses. These are church expenses. Notice that the way that I put this on the slide, these are church expenses. It's not the minister's money. It's not part of their salary. It's, we have this idea that you make money on your car allowance and stuff like that. You don't. The IRS mileage rate, anybody know what the mileage rate is for this year? 70 cents a mile. And that rate is based on an economy car. It's based on an economy car. And it sounds like a lot of money. It sounds like we're going to make money on driving our car for the church, but it doesn't really work out that way. You know what the average cost of a new car in America today is?
$35,000.
It's a little more, a little higher.
45.
It's almost 50. It's like $49,000 is the average cost of a new car today. The average cost of a used car today is 25. So wow, that's a lot of money. Now, and of course, you can spend a lot more than that. Now, I've seen, and what blows my mind, when I was in high school and college, I drove a delivery truck for a drugstore, and we had a truck, had no air, no radio, nothing, no power, anything, and because that was the cheapest vehicle that you could get at the time. That's not true of trucks anymore. Trucks can be up to and exceeding $100,000 for a truck. It just blows my mind. But anyway, what is the number one cost of operating a car? The most expensive thing in operating that car, the most expensive part of the puzzle, what is it? It's actually, it's depreciation. It's depreciation. That when you drive the car off the lot, it's immediately it's gone down in value. And then especially in those first years, it's going to depreciate thousands of dollars especially in those first years. And we don't really see depreciation. We don't think about it. We just think about the monthly payment. And we don't think about that at all. And the only time that you ever think about depreciation is if I try to sell it and I'm upside down, then I'm in trouble. But so the 70 cents a mile is intended to cover the cost. So that's going to be depreciation and maintenance, and it's going to cover your gas and oil and things like that for an economy car. Economy car. Many of the cars that we drive today, if they're pretty new, they might be $1 a mile. They might be more than, if it's a truck, it might be more than that. Per mile is the actual cost. Now, we might be just thinking about our payment and the gas, and that's all we're thinking about, but it's really more than that. So that's a reimbursement for an expense that you incurred. And if the church is not reimbursing you that 70 cents a mile, you're actually, money is coming out of your pocket for that, and the church should reimburse you for those expenses. And then conference expenses, books, continuing education, and ministry hospitality. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. So to create we're going to go back to page 9. Just wanted to kind of mention that about salary a little bit. To create a new position, we need to watch for heavy workloads, the growth of the church and or community, things that are not being done, the loss of a valued worker. We've got one worker in our church that was just amazing, and I don't see how that person's going to be replaced by just one person. That we at least need a person and a half to replace that one. So loss of a valued worker. All right. Uh-oh, there it goes. All right, let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk some about job descriptions. Let me ask y'all to, help us out with some questions, anything that you want to. I've done too much of the talking. Before we break, Beth, do we have any questions from anybody online yet? Okay. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Oh, yes.
I would like to say that your page numbers are not running in line with my book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it's 2 pages.
Yeah, it's
I'm 2
Oh.
pages
1
off.
to 2 pages.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. It's been they've been reprinted.
Yeah.
And
I was trying to find
apologize.
it, I just realized you're on 11, not, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So our next page, developing job descriptions, will be on page 12.
It's at the beginning of the bottom of 11.
11, okay.
But probably go to the front.
All right. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and talk about job descriptions. All right, I'm going to kind of change gears. We'll come back to job descriptions in a few minutes, but I'm going to change gears. And I want us to look at compensation and the compensation planning guide. You might want to pull that out of your packet. Do y'all have it? Do y'all have it in your packet? Compensation planning guide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Pull that out, and then also this 2025-26 tax changes. I'm just gonna, I know some of y'all were here in the summertime, but this part won't take long, and I just wanted to kind of go over it a little bit about some of the tax changes that have come about as a result of the bill that was passed July the 4th, or signed July the 4th. So let's look at that sheet. It's just that single handout sheet, 25-26 tax changes. So first of all, the main thing is that the new legislation makes permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. And if this bill had not been passed, and no bill had been passed, we would have reverted back to the way that taxes were done back in 2017 and prior. And if you'll remember back to 2017 and prior, remember we had a smaller standard deduction, but we had personal exemptions and all that kind of stuff, and that was the way that you did your W-4, was based on your filing status, but also your personal exemptions. But we don't have personal exemptions, and all that's been made permanent. So that does simplify our taxes for most Americans. About 90% of Americans, it makes it simple, like it has been for these last few years. And so it makes it permanent, but also it makes permanent a couple of things that happened in 2018 as a result of the 2017 bill. One of those things is that no employee can write off business expenses any longer on your taxes. No employee. You can't do it. I've had a pastor recently who was shocked that he couldn't write off his business expenses. And so there's still some lack of realization of that out there. You cannot write off business expenses related to your employment, so therefore your church needs to reimburse those expenses. And your church needs to set up a budget to do that. And that's now been made permanent. Now, ministers do have some self-employment income. What would be, a minister has a dual tax status. They're an employee for federal purposes. They're self-employed for Social Security purposes. So, but for some things, a couple of things, they really are self-employed. What would those things be?
Housing.
I'm sorry?
Housing.
It's housing and salary as a part of their employment from their church. But they do some things that really are their own business. Weddings, funerals, conferences, speaking engagements, other things that they do. And they receive money from doing other things outside the church. And that is self-employment income, and they can write off business expenses related to that. One time a year or so ago, I drove 400 miles to do a funeral. So it was a close friend, and I drove 400 miles to do a funeral. So if I had gotten, I think I did get an honorarium for that funeral, and so that honorarium I could have subtracted out that mileage in terms of on a Schedule C is what I could do. So we do have some employment, some that is truly self-employed. But with the church, I cannot write off any business expenses whatsoever on my taxes, I've got to get reimbursed for those business expenses. So church needs to think about that. Church needs to set up a budget for that. The ministers need to think about that too, and not think, oh, well, I'll just forgo that reimbursement. I'll write it off on my taxes, because you can't. Okay? And that's now been made permanent. Another one and that's been made permanent, as far as I can find. Now, the things I'm going to say today, it might be slightly different. We'll talk about this again in January, and it might be slightly different by then because of some new things that we might know. So don't hold me to it 100%. There could be something happen, or regulation, or something that we just don't see yet in this. But also moving expenses. Remember how for the last 7 years they've been taxable income when you were reimbursed for your moving expenses? It looks like that's been made permanent too. That will be taxable. So the big point here is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 was made permanent. There were some additional tax breaks given, and one thing that was really surprising is that they raised the standard deduction for 2025. Well, we already have a standard deduction announced for 2025, and they just raised it a little bit more. So for a single person, it's $15,750. For a married couple, it's $31,500. And so you're getting a little bit of a break on your 2025 taxes, even though we're most of the way through the year. Next, the child tax credit went up to from $2,000 to $2,200. It's not a big increase, but they made a little bit more of it refundable. Refundable. That means that if a person gets their taxes all the way down to zero and they have this credit, then they're still going to get some money back if it's a refundable credit. So they made more of that refundable. Credits that are non-refundable, if you got your taxes all the way down to zero and you had a non-refundable credit, you just don't get anything. And but they did increase that child tax credit a little bit. State and local taxes that you could deduct went up to $40,000 from $10,000, and so that was an increase. The estate and gift tax exemption went up from $13.99 to $15 million. Now, I know that everybody came here today just to hear that, so you would know that your estate's going to be okay. You got a few more $1 million that you can have in your estate without it going to the government, and then $30 million for a married couple. Here's a big one. If you are 65 and older, then there is an additional $6,000 bonus deduction, part of the standard deduction. And it's a bonus deduction. So what that's going to do is you've already got $30,000, if you're married, $31,500, plus if you're a married couple, $6,000 plus $6,000, so $12,000 more. So you got $43,500 before you're going to be paying any taxes as someone over 65. Now, what they wanted to do is they wanted to eliminate the tax on Social Security benefits, and they didn't eliminate it. They did this instead. And I heard Trump talk about, basically he considered it a win, that he considered that as basically doing the same thing for most Americans. that this bonus deduction. And that was the way they accomplished that. Now, that's only in effect for 25 through 28. So if you are 65 and older, you can save some on your taxes. All right. Next is there are Trump accounts set up for children who are born between 25 and 28, and the government's going to deposit $1,000 into those accounts. Now, how the accounts will be done, I don't know. I don't have a clue. But if you know someone who is having a child or will have a child in the next couple of years, there will be an account for them. It will be set up into an account that will, I'm guessing it's going to be a fund like the S&P 500, something along that lines. It's not going to be a savings account. It's going to be an investment account. They can't do anything with it until they're 18, I think it is. It's restricted as to what they can do with it, and also parents can contribute to it, and actually an employer can contribute to it. The idea is to have investing that's going to last a long time. It could possibly be used for education, or possibly used for like down payment on a new home. But I don't know how those are going to be done. In fact, in the legislation, it's not going to happen, even for a child born in 25, it's not going to happen until 26. I think they gave that extra time to figure out how they're going to do this. And but that's going to happen for children born 25 to 28. All right, car loan interest, that you can deduct up to $10,000 of car loan interest, and that will be, now it has stipulations. It has to be a new car, can't be a used car. It has to be brand new, and it has to be an American car. And as I understand it, the way they're defining an American car is that its final assembly happened here in the U.S. And so these days, we've got here in Alabama, we've got Honda and Toyota, and actually at least one Mercedes model that's built here in Alabama. So those are going to be considered American made because they're final assembly. Whereas you might have a different car, well, like Mercedes. You could have that model that might be considered to be American made, and you might have other models of Mercedes that are not. And so we'll see how that plays out, but that's the way that I understand it, is it's got to be a new car, not used, and it's got to be American made. There's a tax break on tip income up to $25,000, and that's going to be on the federal income tax. And there's a tax break on overtime pay up to $12,500, and that will be federal tax. Now, this is where it's kind of complicated because Alabama had no tax on overtime pay last year, but it's gone, and now we've got it from the federal government for 25 through 28. It's only for those years, and then we'll see if Congress extends those tax breaks. Now, you do have to, for a worker working and receiving overtime, you will be paying the FICA. So you'll be showing wages less in terms of federal income tax, but all the wages, including the overtime pay, for purposes of FICA. Have y'all heard from your computer software company about that? And that I'm sure they'll figure it into your software, where I'm sure they'll figure it where your software will calculate it for you. I hope. Now, some of your churches do have overtime pay. Some of your churches, you have a daycare or a school or something like that, and you will experience overtime pay periodically. But even if you don't have those things going on, if you have an overtime situation where somebody who's not a minister, not an exempt worker, they work more than 40 hours in a work week, you've got to pay them that overtime. You can't just say, hey, take a couple hours off next week. You've got to do that within that 7-day period. The EV credit for electric vehicles, that credit is going away as of the end of September this month. And then the credit for other things like, for example, solar panels and stuff like that for your house, that credit is going away at the end of December. There will be a charitable deduction for non-itemizers, but that's going to begin in 26. It's not going to be this year. And it's going to be up to $1,000. So that'll help even for a non-item, and $2,000 for a married couple. All right, so bottom line is that our procedures are going to be essentially the same as they have been for the last 7 years. Your W-4, your W-2 is going to be pretty much the same, except I have a feeling that they'll have a new procedure for the W-2 for overtime pay, and I think it will be where that overtime pay will, I'm guessing here, because I haven't seen it, I haven't found it yet, but I'm guessing that it will not show up in box 1 of the W-2, but it will show up in box 12 with some kind of special code for it, but that it would show up in boxes 3 and 5 and be subject to FICA. So be careful about overtime pay and be ready for that for next year. For January when we're doing the W-2s for this year. Okay? All right, so that's kind of all that I know about what's going on tax-wise. And be alert, there could be some more things that we find out about from the legislation, or more things that we didn't understand it from the first go-around. And so we'll see. What's it tell me? Okay. Now let's go to the compensation planning guide. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we go over it very often in tax workshops and things like that, but I do want to point out just a few things in the compensation planning guide, and that's that green, that dark green that you've got, compensation planning guide. Y'all, no? Y'all don't have it? Okay.
Minister estimated taxes.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll do that after lunch. Okay, let's go back to main thing that I wanted to, and the main thing that I wanted to point out to you from the compensation planning guide is that ordained ministers have a dual tax status. They're an employee for federal purposes. They're self-employed for Social Security purposes. That means they've got to pay their own self-employment tax. But it also means that they're entitled to housing allowance. I had a minister just the other day say, I really don't want to do that. I want you to treat me like a regular employee and take out FICA on me. And I'll forgo the housing allowance so that you can take out FICA on me. And actually, it's a part of the IRS code. I found the code section and found it in Richard Hammer's book, Church and Clergy Tax Guide, the big book that's, he's the #1 leader for church and tax in the whole U.S. Found it in his book, found it in the IRS code that the ministers who are ordained ministers serving in a church This is how they're supposed to be treated. They're supposed to be self-employed for their Social Security purposes, and they're supposed to pay their own self-employment tax. So you really can't do that. And Hammer said it would be improper to do that. So I want to point out that ministers have a dual tax status. Second thing I wanted to point out in the book is you've got to reimburse business expenses. If you don't reimburse business expenses, then they're out of luck. And so be careful with that, be generous with that. I think, now this is opinion, and I'll label it as such, I think that we need to be pretty generous with that reimbursement of business expense. For example, a minister does a funeral for somebody who's not a member of your church. Well, I think you ought to be willing to reimburse for that because he might not get an honorarium for that. A lot of funerals you don't. You might not. And a lot of times, well, like I told you about the funeral that I drove 400 miles round trip for, I think that the honorarium was adequate for that day, but that would be rare. A lot of funeral honorariums are less than that, even the mileage that I drove. And a lot of them are much less than that. But so be willing to reimburse in those kind of situations, because a minister would be just a total jerk to refuse to do a funeral because he's not going to get reimbursed on mileage. I think another situation, we need to make it where they can take, it's got to have a ministry purpose, but they can take someone to lunch for a ministry purpose. Brand new person, could be a church leader that you want to discuss plans for the year, and you take them to lunch and you get reimbursed for that. I think we need to be fairly generous with that sort of thing. I think a youth minister, they need to do some things. They need to do some things in their schools. They need to go to the high school band concert or choir concert or the play or things like that. And there's usually, $8 or so to get into those things these days. And so reimburse for that kind of thing. Now, if your guy is just crazy about football and he wants to go to every high school football game, well, maybe not reimburse for all those, but encourage him to be where the students are and to have those ministry touches with them and reimburse them for those kind of expenses. Okay, so be sure to do that. Y'all have any questions about that, or something that you felt like, well, should we reimburse it or should we not reimburse it, or what do you think? Okay, all right, y'all are quiet today. Let's go on to page 11 in your book, and we're going to talk a little bit about developing job descriptions. Uh-oh. For some reason, it went all the way back to the beginning. Okay. Page 11. Job descriptions should be helpful to the minister and should clarify the important part of the job. Job descriptions should be the basis for evaluation, and it should provide clarity to, and I know this is an old saying, but I like it still, to keep the main thing, that we want to keep that on track. So we need to have a simple outline for the job description. You and I have seen job descriptions that are a list of 20 things. That's typical. That's and if you look in our materials that we have as samples, you'll find that list of 20 things. And that's so typical of job descriptions. But that minister will think about, well, what out of these 20 things to do, what's most important? What is the main key area of my work? And what do I do? And so Dr. Dale Huff was my boss for many years. He's retired. He's still serving part-time as a contract worker. But so for a pastor, he outlined it in this way: preaching, teaching ministry, the pastoral care ministry, and administration. And the way that he talked about administration, he talked about it in terms of leadership and developing leaders and developing the work of the church and those kind of things. Not, administration, he didn't mean operating the copier or stuff like that. But he divided it into those three things. And he said, you're going to have one of these that you're great at. You're going to have one of them you're not so good at. And you need to have pretty good proficiency in all three. And but churches typically, when they call a new pastor, they go the other way. They've had somebody who's a great preacher, but not so good in pastoral care. They call a person who's great in pastoral care next time, and vice versa. So be careful of what your committee is doing and that you don't overreact. But a minister should be proficient in all three. A youth minister. My friend, he was one of my best friends, Keith Loomis, who's passed away now. He talked about it being a three-legged stool, youth ministry. And he said our ministry to and with the youth, our ministry to and with the parents of youth, and my ministry to help the teachers, help those who lead the youth, help develop them as a teacher and as a Bible teacher, and how they relate to the youth. And so he talked about it like a three-legged stool, that you got to have all three legs or the stool's going to fall over. And so that kind of gets us on point of what's the main thing of what I do. And you can think about the same kind of way in children's ministry. Discipleship pastor, there's a job description that was out there that broke it down into parts: as an administrator, as a growth agent, as an educator, and as a minister, pastoral care ministry in particular. But we need to think about an outline. What's the main part of your job? And that's what we're going to evaluate on. It's going to be the main part of your job. And so evaluations are in section 4, starting on page 15. And it's a good time to recognize achievement, set goals and objectives, deal with potential problems, and recommend merit raises. Evaluation should be a good time. Now, it should be a good time that we can help an employee. I dread evaluations. Anybody look forward to an evaluation? I dread it, but it should be a good time. It should be a time that we help them, we help show them their strengths, we help to show them what they have done well and accomplished, and pat them on the back for those kind of things. But also that we look at what are the needs, what are the goals for next year. Now, pastor, this is opinion, and I'll label it as such. I think the best way to evaluate a pastor is to have a process of self-evaluation, and then self-evaluation with the deacons or leadership team or whatever that you have. And so the pastor says, here's the things that I've accomplished this year. Here's what I've done. Here's those things, and here's my needs, here's where I didn't quite meet those goals, and here's my goals for next year. And the pastor puts that together, and this team discusses it with him and talks about it, because there might be some things, there needs to be an evaluation. There might be some things he's missing. Maybe he's doing a good job, but he doesn't think of himself that way. Maybe he's got some blind sides that he's missing, that y'all need to help him. And so look at evaluation that you help him to do a better job. Not that we're going to tear him down and things like that. But in my opinion, and again opinion, I think this is a good way to do it. Now, the rest of the staff, we oftentimes the pastor evaluates the staff and then reports to the personnel committee. Often it can be the other way. Personnel committee evaluates staff and reports to the pastor, but I think that first way is really better because pastor is the one that works with them every day. Now, in y'all's case, a very large church, you've probably got a level of ministerial staff that evaluates a lower level, and then pastor evaluates this upper level of ministerial staff. But the pastor needs to be involved in this. At the State Board of Missions, here's what our evaluation is. It's these 5 things. It's been this way for about 20 years. I know what's coming. I know what to expect. I know what's expected of me. That I have a positive spirit, that I'm punctual, that I'm present with, engaged with the churches, productive, and that I am making progress. Dale Huff told me when I first came here, I've been here 23 years, and when I first came here, he said, and I think this is kind of typical, maybe even of some of our churches, not all of them, but some of them. It's different here. It's going to take you about 3 years before you feel any level of comfort with this situation. And he was right. He was right. And so we need to be making progress. Progress as a minister, progress in our own spiritual development, and we need to be making progress. Now, you see those 5 Ps. Guess who that came from? That came from Dr. Lance. He loves alliteration. But I think this is a good method, and we discuss it. Our supervisor discusses it with us, and we have a chance to give feedback to our supervisor in terms of what we've accomplished, what we've done, and so forth. But evaluation needs to be simple. It needs to be a discussion back and forth, and it needs to be productive in terms of helping that person to do even better. This was an evaluation that I found, and you don't need the notes on this or anything like that, but so we look at overall ministry. Number 1, we look at overall ministry, that teacher, preacher, worship leader, study and preparation, spiritual insights, effective planner, effective leader for the worship service, pastoral care, how do you do in that? That you're timely and helpful in a crisis, you're available when needed, provides effective counseling, that you maintain confidentiality, that you're a good listener, leadership, that you demonstrate initiative, recognizes opportunities, can be flexible and creative, that you analyze the congregation effectively and communicate well. So that's a good evaluation. And then administration, effective in developing plans and priorities and programs, and ability to develop volunteer leaders. So now, if you look at all those things, can anybody do all those things? No. But those are the things to strive for. And they're not going to be good at all. And on the things that they can't do very well, we want to help them to delegate that or help them to find a way that we get that done. I've mentioned a lot about my church in Huntsville, and there's not very much staff. So a lot of the pastoral care is within the small groups. And our pastor says it from the pulpit. He said something interesting just a couple of weeks ago. He said at first, he said, I shouldn't say this. And then he thought about it, and then he said, but I'm going to say it. But basically he said, out of people who are serving and leading and helpful and ministering to others and all that stuff, don't have a problem from one, not one. If there's a person who's dissatisfied, causing problems, things like that, he says, I know one thing about that person. They're not doing anything. They're not doing anything to serve the Lord. They're not doing anything to serve this church. And now I know that maybe there's an exception to that, but I've not seen it. I thought it was pretty bold, but I think he's right. Okay, so we can look at work skills, being effective in our work and so forth. Here's another evaluation: teamwork, judgment, dependability, job knowledge, supervisory role, stewardship, spiritual leadership, personal development. So there's different forms, and you can find a bunch of them. You can find a ton of them online, and just kind of piece it together from some things that you find that you think are good statements, but have it narrowed down to basically about 3 or 4 things. These are the main things of your job. This is the most important thing that you have to do. You should have heard about Pareto's principle, 80-20 rule, that 80% of our results come from 20% of our effort. And that's also where we get that 20% of the people do 80% of the work of the church. That's true in so many of our churches. And so we don't want to just simply work smarter, but work smarter on the right things. We want to concentrate on the right things. When we very first had computers in our church back in the late 80s, when we first had computers, I knew a little bit, but I was the only one. And so in those years, everybody came to me with their computer questions and computer problems, and this messed up and that messed up and all this stuff. And that's one thing that I regret about some of that time period, was I spent way too much time on helping, and I wanted to help people, but way too much time on the computers and not enough time on my job, and the computer thing was part of my job, but I needed to work smarter on the right things at that time period. Okay, we've got time to do this before lunch. We'll talk about something bad before lunch. Then we'll have lunch, and that'll be a good thing. Page 19, I think. Is it 20? Is it on page 20? One day I was talking to Dr. Huff, and Dr. Huff was my mentor. He was my boss for a long time. He is one of the greatest leaders the greatest leaders I've known throughout the years. And so one day I was talking to him and asking him some questions about this, and he was just rattling this stuff off. I mean, just off the top of his head. He knew this stuff. And he was just rattling it off, and so I was taking notes as fast as I could, and I put those notes into what you have in this page today because I thought it was so very wise. Sometimes we've got to do the hard things. Sometimes we've got to do the bad things. Sometimes some person who is on staff, things are not working out well. And so in this evaluation, we need to give them every opportunity that we can to correct what is wrong, to fix things. We need to help them. Dave Ramsey has a quote, and he says that we as Southerners, we kind of dance around the issue. We sort of beat around the bush. We don't say what we mean. And he says, to not be clear is to be unkind. And so then he turns it around. To be clear is also to be kind. And so we need to help people. And we need to see that as our role. Our job is not to, whip the church staff into shape. But our job is to really help people. And but sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes a person is just not working out, and or we've had several instances that I've helped kind of talk a church through it, help them, give the staff person like another 60 days or so to correct this situation, and sometimes that church will come back to me and say, well, we gave them 60 days to correct it. We were very clear about what it needed to be. We did all these things and came back 60 days and still hadn't done anything. And sometimes it's about simple things. Part of our job, and I heard this not too long ago, but a lot of our job in life and in our work and in everything is showing up. And in one of these situations, that person was not showing up. And that's a simple thing to correct. But sometimes these things don't get corrected. And so when they don't, and when you might need to make a change staff-wise, here's the principles, here's the deep principles in that. Number one, there should be absolutely no surprises. No surprises. Tell the staff member the situation. Tell them honestly about the need, area of improvement. Of course, give them that opportunity. We're going to give you 60 days to correct this. And then if resignation or termination becomes certain or needed, then be honest about that. Hey, we're going to give you 60 days. At the end of that time, if these things are not corrected, we're going to suggest that you probably would want to resign at that point. Explain honestly the anticipated steps. So no surprises. And when that happens, unfortunately, when it does happen, then that minister, that staff person would say, I expected that, I knew it was coming. Number two, use a carrot and stick. Now that sounds manipulative, but here's how he means it. If you think that you're going to have to fire somebody, offer them, hey, we will pay you 3 months severance if you'll resign. A carrot and stick, so you offer them the best possible scenario is what you try to do in an attempt to persuade them. And one of the things is that you do not want this to come to a vote. You don't want your church to vote to fire somebody. You really don't want that. Because no matter how bad of a job they did, no matter how bad that was, they've got a fan base out there. And if you got 98% of church who thinks that, yeah, that person's got to go, but the ones that thought, oh, he was wonderful, he was outstanding, and y'all are just being cruel to him in the way that you're treating him. See, you don't want to bring it to a vote because you can very easily cause turmoil or even split your congregation over a vote, and you don't want that to happen. Another thing about voting is that, and this is one thing that Dr. Huff said, is another thing about voting is that neither side has an accurate picture of the congregation. The minister who is being voted on, whether we're terminating him or not, the minister who's being voted on, he thinks his support's a lot bigger. Those who brought the complaint, who think that he needs to go, they think their side is bigger. And sometimes these things come down to, 51-49, and you just do not want your church to be in that situation. So you want to try to avoid a vote. You want to try to avoid unnecessary conflict, and so use a carrot and stick. And I mean that in the best possible way. All right, number 3, keep the discussion of the main 3 or 4 complaints. Don't give him a list of 20 things he's doing wrong. And when you're upset with somebody, you're going to think of 20 things. I don't like the way you comb your hair. I mean, it's going to be down to little things. We had a conflict situation. We had a conflict situation in our church a long time ago, very, very long time ago. There was a conflict situation, and actually one of the members, I couldn't believe he said it, one of the members of the committee complained that this minister had a teenage daughter, and the teenage daughter did things like teenagers often do, and was part of that kind of rebellious time, and this person complained about his teenage daughter, and I said, don't ever go there. You and I don't know what the situation is, and you can look in any home in America, and you can find a bad home where you might find a good kid come out of it, and you can find a good home that a troubled kid comes out of it, and you can't figure out why. So keep the main thing there to those 3 or 4 things. Don't give him a laundry list of 20 things to complain about. Follow the bylaws. You want to always follow your bylaws. Whatever your bylaws say. For example, in some churches, well, like at Heritage now, the way that the bylaws read is that, say, termination of a staff member, not the pastor, but termination of a staff member. So that ministerial staff member is called by the church, but can be terminated by an agreement of the pastor, personnel committee, and deacons in agreement together. So you don't have to bring that to a vote. So that's in the bylaws now. And so that's what I'm saying here is follow the bylaws, whatever the bylaws say. If your bylaws require a vote of the church for that staff member, then you got to do it that way. And then also the support staff can be hired and fired by the personnel committee along with the pastor in doing that. So follow your bylaws, have good bylaws. Be fair and be full of grace. Be full of grace. The process can be more important than the product. So maybe this person needs to go. Maybe the congregation sees this person needs to go. but the way you treat that person, if you treat them badly, that's going to come back on you, and you'll have people mad at you, not at the outcome, but mad at you about the process. It takes 6 months or longer to find a place of service, and so be generous with severance pay and things like that. So that should be generous. It's not like the rest of it, secular industry where you can get a job quicker than that. It just, this involves committees, and those committees take time, and it's just not a quick process typically. But I will say that we are in a shortage of ministers actually right now. When I was first out of seminary, there was almost a surplus of ministers. It's hard to find a job. Nowadays, it's hard to find a minister. Use important key leaders in the church. Make sure that you've got the support of key leaders. So don't do, you as an administrator, you as a church leader, make sure you're not doing this out on your own, that nobody's behind you. All right, number 8, realize that others are not where you are. A lot of the congregation probably doesn't realize it at all. And number 9, do not mislead the congregation. No matter what, don't mislead them. So there have been situations where a minister is terminated for doing something wrong, terminated for even, let's say something really bad like theft or having an affair or something of that nature, and they're terminated for that reason. Tell that minister you may resign, and in your resignation, we'll let you tell why, but you don't, fib about that, because if you do, we're going to tell the truth. We're going to tell the truth and what really happened. And so don't mislead the congregation. There's been a lot of ministers who've been able to kind of slip out the back door. Well, there was, I had this is an experience that I'll never forget. I had the experience of preaching at a church the Sunday after the minister had resigned. He had had an affair. And so I preached the next Sunday. And that was hard. That was difficult. And so he had had an affair. He resigned. He slipped on out. And this lady came up to me. And and the lady who he had the affair with was in the congregation. And this other lady came up to me and she said, that lady just had it in for him. And, she was out to get him. And I just kind of shook her hand and said, we'll be praying and that sort of thing. But the truth of it is with a minister having an affair, it's his fault. It's his fault. No matter if she was out to get him, it's still his fault. He should know better. And I didn't try to, argue with that lady, but it is his fault. He should have known better. And so those kind of situations, you need to tell that minister, we are not going to lie for you. We're not going to just try to destroy you, but we're not going to lie for you. We're going to tell the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, we will. All right, then time to vacate the office should be short but reasonable. And, if he gives you, things have been bad and he gives you a month notice, say, well, we'll pay you that month and you may, you may go in a week or whatever the there's a need for him to wrap up some things or things like that, a week or 2 weeks or whatever. All right. So I think that's those are from Dr. Huff, and I just thought that was very, very valuable and helpful. And I hope you don't have to do that. I hope you don't have to. All right. Let's go on. We're going to be on page. Is this on page 20? Employment practices. 21. Page 21. So we're going to talk just a minute about calling ministerial staff. Now, you are not the ones to call a pastor. That's going to be a pastor search committee, and virtually every church has that procedure for a pastor search committee. But if you need to call ministerial staff, other ministers, the procedure has some similarity to it, but it also has some other things involved in it. And it is a great responsibility, but a great blessing as well. And you're going to learn a lot about your church as you do so. So the very first thing, if you're going to call, say, a youth minister or a children's minister or something like that, then you as personnel team, administrators, others, you're going to be involved in that. And first of all, you got to get organized. And in some churches, it's the personnel team. In some churches, you might bring in, say, a person from the children's ministry that's very key in that children's ministry. If you're bringing in a music minister, you're bringing in some people from the music leadership that is going to be key onto, because typically a personnel committee is not usually that versed in children or in music or in youth or whatever we're doing. So you often have others who join you to be involved in that search. But y'all need to decide what's the best way for us to go about it. As you go, you want to have a bond of confidentiality that, this is always, in ministry, this is the weirdest thing of all, maybe of everything in ministry. It's the weirdest thing to me that a minister never ever says they're thinking about leaving to go to another church, because their church is going to get mad at them. But we go out into the coaching world, and it's all about the news about what coach is going where, and things like that. And it is so and so is probably going to be leaving and things like that. But of course, a lot of coaches get fired, and we don't want to do that. But that is a weird thing. But it is important for you to have confidentiality, because if it gets back to that church that you're talking to, their youth minister, then their people are going to be unhappy with their youth minister. So have confidentiality. You're going to make a report to the church periodically. Your report will be pretty vague. It'll be sort of the stage that we're in. We're in the stage now of gathering information about developing a profile. Then the next report, we're in the stage of now we've studied all that, and we're looking into resumes right now, that we're gathering resumes. Your next report might be, hey, we're getting close, and and so forth. So your report is vague because of this confidentiality thing, but you do keep the congregation informed. And then, as best you possibly can, you need to be unanimous, because it's tough to come into a church and be accepted by that church. It's tough to be involved, and the people are on board with you as a minister and things like that. And so if you're unanimous as a committee, as a personnel team, then it will help that minister to get off to a good start. You need to do a self-study of the church. How many youth do we have? How many youth are in our area, our geographic area? What's our potential? That sort of thing. And then we need to develop a profile. And so develop the job description, determine what are the expectations, age, education, experience, so forth. And when you think about a youth minister, do they need to be married? Because at one point, I was on the search team to find a youth minister for our church. And we ended up getting a guy that was single. And is that a good idea? No, it's really not. But we knew this guy well. He grew up in our church. We knew exactly about his character, and it worked out fine. But is that a good idea? Typically, no. Typically, it would be a better idea to have a youth minister who's married, because some of your youth are 17 and 18, and in fact, this guy, that when we called him, he was just out of college. He was 22. So you think about young single, 22 single, and young ladies in the youth ministry that are 18. You don't. And you might want to make a provision, hey, no dating of the youth while you're the youth minister. So you need to think about all the different aspects of what can this person be like. And another question that you need to look at is, could he be divorced? Is that possible? And you might, for a lot of our churches in the senior pastor role, that answer would be no. In a lot of our churches, they can't have been divorced. But in a different ministerial role, you might say that we would accept that. But you need to think about some of these things, because you don't want to get in the position of, hey, we like this guy, we've fallen in love with this guy, but we didn't talk about those things, and now we found out, hey, he's divorced. What do we think about that? You want to think about those things ahead of time about your candidates. Then begin to gather resumes. The Leader Care Office, Director of Missions, your schools, colleges, Baptist colleges, Beeson, seminaries, from other ministers, and even you can have recommendations from your congregation that they might send you a resume, and that's your sources for resumes. It is harder these days because I tell you, there aren't very many music ministers out there, and so if you get a good one, you're very fortunate because they're not plentiful. Youth ministers are not as plentiful as they used to be. Things like that, and so you want to have good sources. So step 3, we've developed a profile. What kind of age can this youth minister be? What kind of experience? Do we want him to have a college degree or not? Does he need seminary or not? And we called at Heritage a long time ago, we called a youth minister that didn't have his college degree yet. And our encouragement was that he would soon get it. And so the personnel committee was involved in encouraging that to happen. But you got to think about what are our qualifications, what are our things that have just got to be that way, and what are things that we might be willing to say, hey, he doesn't have his college degree yet, but we'll work with him about that one. So then consider the resumes, gather further information, and then contact that prospective minister. And here you can do a phone call and just do a preliminary, one person on the committee calling that prospective minister, interviewing in an informal way to gather more information. But when you get down to it, when you get down to, say, you narrow it down to like 3, and then when you get to that point, you say, we're going to decide on one at a time. And you should just consider one at a time. You don't want it to really be a comparing. Hey, this guy has an outgoing personality, this guy doesn't, but this guy seems to know more about the Bible than this guy, and things like that. You don't want to be in that comparing game. You want to consider one at a time and say, and your question is this God's man for us or not? And then you want to interview, present the job description, the expectations, and then on your second interview, you would discuss salary and benefits and things like that. And then if this is the person that y'all believe is the one, for God's person for us, then your next step is present that person to the church. Typically in our churches, there's going to be a vote on that youth minister, and know your bylaws, what's required, what kind of notice do you need to give, and what sort of result. Maybe you need a 2/3 vote or something like that, and know those bylaws. Now, a couple of important principles. Your pastor needs to be involved in this process in whatever way he wants to be. So I've seen it done where the pastor goes out and finds the person and brings that person to the committee to interview. I've seen the committee go out and interview people and bring a person back to the pastor to interview. But the main thing is pastor needs to be involved, and y'all talk about how the pastor is involved. Which way does that work in your church? When you get right down to it, consider one person at a time. Visit that person in their home church as you can, as is possible. If you went in, say you're looking for a minister of music, and you go into the worship service and you're there at the worship service at his church, well, that wouldn't be too weird. For you to show up, you're looking for a youth minister, and for you to show up at his youth Bible study on a Wednesday night, that would be weird. So try to visit them on their home turf if you can, and then interview, ask questions about his life, ministry, leadership style, philosophy of ministry. Now, a lot of guys, they're not going to know what you're talking about. Maybe they haven't had a lot of seminary or some kind of formal education in that, but you just want to know what are the main things about youth ministry, what's the most important points about youth ministry to you, how do you work, where do you start in youth ministry, and where are you trying to go in youth ministry? So what are you trying to do? That'd be sort of some elements of philosophy of ministry. What's their experience? And then if they are married, this one is really important. If they are married, the wife needs to be, and of course I'm old and sort of thinking about usual minister as a man, but if they are married, the spouse needs to be there, because you're going to get some insights from that spouse, and you might get some vibes or some feedback from that spouse that you hadn't thought about. When I was a volunteer at Heritage a long time ago, after I started coming here to serve here at the State Board of Missions, I served on the pastor search committee, and we interviewed. We did follow this advice. We had the wife involved, and we should have picked up on that she really didn't want to come to our church. We should have picked up on that. Now, they stayed in our church about 3 years. They were, sweet people, and we loved them. But and then after, then they served one other church in Alabama, and then they went back to their home state. And a lot of that was her and her desire to be in her home area or hometown or wherever it was. But we should have picked up on that, and we didn't. And so you need to have the spouse there to be able to pick up on some insights that you otherwise might have missed. Write out the consideration of the call. That's going to be salary, fringe benefits, vacation time, start date, things like that. Put it in writing, leave nothing to chance. But this is not a contract. Contract implies that, that we're going to pay you, and contract kind of implies, like coaching in football world, that if we fire you, we got to pay out your contract. No, that's not the way that it works. But you do want to have this considerations of the call, that you have an understanding between you, the committee, and that prospective minister. Invite him to your church, meet with committees and other leaders at a suitable time to begin to acclimate that person to your church. Check references. This is one thing that we as churches don't do very well, and that is check references. Check references, ask for more references, and you do want to really get a good feel for that from references. I think, now this is opinion again, I think that on every minister, no matter what they do, whether they're, children's minister or pastor or anything in between, I think we should do a credit check. And my reason for that is not that we want a perfect credit score, but we just want to know that they are responsible and they're responsible to pay their bills. That's all. So I think that we should do that. Of course, you should do background check, obviously, and check all these references. So criminal background check. And know the limitations of criminal background check. There's a lot of things that don't show up. Maybe it doesn't show up because the county that happened in didn't report it. And then also, Ministry Safe talks about background checks a lot. And you can do your background checks through Ministry Safe. They can do a county check as well as the national database. So they can do the best kind of credit check, best kind of background check you can get, but it's still limited. And when, they talk all the time about child sexual abuse, only about 1 in 10 of abusers are ever caught. So the other 9 don't show up on a background check. So you're going to need to ask lots of questions and check references. And you can ask those kind of questions about if you were to, rehire this person, would you rehire this person? That sort of thing. And Ministry Safe recommends when you're in this process to have them do the Ministry Safe training, basic training. It takes about 1 hour and 15 minutes. It's done online. And have them do that before you ever call them. Because if they do have any kind of history of being a predator of any kind, then they will see that. They'll know that your church knows about how this works, how predators work, and therefore we're on the watch And therefore, if you are a predator, you might want to not come here. I think that's a good idea. In the last interviews, especially when the wife is involved, I thought this was some good suggestions. Go to a restaurant and just see how that person treats people. How do they treat the server? How do they treat their wife? And one guy, I thought this, Charles Schwab talked about this. I thought this was great. He said to tell the server to mess his order up and see how he reacts to the messed up order. So just some things like that. And then invite the spouse. You pick up on things about how do they treat their spouse and some things you might want to not miss. Look at his car. Does it look like an episode of The Hoarders? You know, just some basic kinds of things that you can detect. Now, that one's not necessarily that he's going to be a bad youth minister, but it does tell you a little bit about who they are, their character. And then after the call, make sure that they're very welcomed and provide your policies, provide copy of whatever documents for the church, the bylaws and stuff. Get them the church history, a tour, give them all the information that they need, introduce all the staff, and introduce them to their key leaders. All right. On page 86, now this is where you go into the appendix part of the book. There are some interview questions there, so that's probably page 87 or 88.
88.
88. And just some suggested questions as you're involved in this sort of process. All right, what questions do you have? Anybody? I know some of y'all are, now I think y'all are looking for a pastor. Y'all are about to get a pastor this Sunday, yeah. And do y'all have a new staff member of any kind in the works in the future, or not yet? Okay.
Well, we need a ministry assistant for the children, but I don't know if they're actively seeking or not.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anybody else involved in the process of?
Once the new senior pastor comes on, we're going full-time music minister, so.
Yeah.
that'll be open.
So y'all be working on that.
We just finished a minister of worship
Okay.
process.
You want to tell us a little bit about how that went?
Our executive staff, which includes our senior pastor, our executive staff, pastor, our minister of family, and our minister of youth, those four are our executive staff level. They all individually, either in a group or individually, had met with this candidate that had been identified. They also went down and observed him leading worship. And then the interview team consisted of the executive staff members, 3 members from our praise and worship team, and 3 members from our personnel work team.
Okay.
And then that group was unanimous, and that individual was started this past Sunday, in fact.
Oh, great. Great. So that'd be a great start. Great way to start. Sounds good. Anybody else in that process?
We're looking for a worship minister.
Okay.
I applauded our deacons for the foresight of, we were in the process of hunting our new senior pastor when the minister of music, who was part-time, resigned.
Yeah.
And they saw the need to go full-time with the position, but wait until the new pastor was in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, that's very good. Let that new pastor be involved. Yeah. It's good. All right. So, in we've talked a little bit about the compensation planning guide. And y'all don't have this. I'll tell you what, Beth, do you have some upstairs? If we could just hand those out to you, but I'm gonna give you the 5-minute summary of that. Okay, so first of all, ministers have this dual tax status. They're employees of the church for federal purposes, they're self-employed for Social Security, but they are eligible for housing allowance. And so that has to do with how you do their taxes and stuff. But then the compensation planning guide is divided basically into 3 things. So first of all, do we provide, well, basically 4 things. Number 1, do we have written policies about our procedures, about our benefits, about that we reimburse for business expenses? Do we have all those things in writing about, and then other policies like vacation time and things like that? Do we have that in writing? We should. We should have in writing that we provide salary and housing and that we provide these following benefits. And we should outline what those benefits are. So that all that needs to be in writing. Second, we do need to provide for reimbursement of those business expenses. And we've talked a little bit about that. Third, we need to provide some benefits, whatever benefits you can provide, whatever ones you can provide. Now, a big church is going to provide full benefits. So typically, the bivocational churches, they typically provide some money into the retirement. And I'm talking about the actual benefit from the church, not just the person taking that out of their salary, although they can do that too. But a bivocational church usually does that. Then when you get into a size of, say, 100 and more, then you begin to see some benefits provided by the church. And there's actually a way that you can do some, let's say you can't provide health insurance. You just can't afford it. But you can provide it. There's a way to do an HRA, a health reimbursement, that you can pay for some of it. Now you got to do that properly. You can't just do the reimbursement. It's got to be in writing and it's got to follow the rules. It's called a qualified small employer HRA. So provide benefits, whatever you can. We see that when a church is, say, 150, it's typical for the pastor to have health insurance. When we see a church running 250 in attendance, it's very common. Yes?
Beth asked me to interrupt and see if you each had the green church compensation study guide.
Yes. Well, the planning guide.
Folder.
It's the dark green. This is the salary report.
She didn't know if she needed to bring it down or not.
Yeah, please, for enough for this group.
So bring the dark green.
Yeah, it's the dark green compensation planning guide.
All right.
It's from Guidestone.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
So provide whatever benefits you can. And at 250 in attendance or more, it's very typical for the staff to have health insurance. Not always, but it's more typical. And then when you get to an attendance of like 400 and 500, it's almost all the churches will provide it. So do whatever benefits you can and have those benefits spelled out. Don't let it be whatever the pastor negotiates. And the pastor negotiates health insurance and the youth minister doesn't know that he should and he doesn't get it. Don't do that. Develop a plan where you're providing the same benefits for everybody. Then the final part of it is about housing allowance and salary. So you got then your salary. From that salary, a minister can ask for a housing allowance. And so the minister requests it, the church approves it. And whatever method you have for your church to approve it. Could be a vote of the church. It could be that your committee approves that housing allowance. But whatever you do, you need to put that in writing to that minister. So those are the key points of the compensation planning guide. And so the main point is put together a plan and follow your plan. Yes.
On the housing allowance,
Okay.
does the committee has to formally approve it? Does it have to be in minutes? And-
Somebody does.
And then if it gets changed during the year, do they have to approve the change?
Well, yes, some, like, for instance, a personnel committee, leadership team, somebody could approve that housing allowance. And then I think, now, this is just my opinion, I think I would have that ministers may request a change in their housing allowance, and during the year, it would be, and you designate somebody. The administrator will approve that, or the chairman of the committee will approve that change. But those changes do need some sort of church approval.
We've typically, they tell us what their housing is, and it gets signed off on by our executive pastor, but
Okay.
the committee doesn't sign it, it's not really in minutes, but that probably needs to be changed.
Well, what if you could have a policy that I think you could have a policy about. Hammer suggested that your church could have a policy that you would provide housing allowance for all eligible ministers. And I mean, like, his suggested policy was it could be up to half of salary. Of course, in our smaller churches and bivocational, it can be up to all of it, but you could have a policy like that, and maybe your policy could state that it will be for all eligible ordained ministers and will be approved by the administrator. I think that would be acceptable to have it where it is approved by a church action. I've talked to lots of churches that I'll ask them, well, how do you do housing allowance? And they'll reply back to me, oh, our pastor just does it. Well, he doesn't have the authority to do it, but so somebody needs to do it. And I do think that y'all could have it written in your policy, and your policy is that the executive pastor approves it within reasonable guidance. Something like that.
Ours has to be signed off by the chair of the personnel work team.
Okay? And is that as far as it goes?
Well,
with
the
y'all?
executive pastor brings that to the personnel work team,
Okay,
and then the personnel work team chairman is the one that would authorize
Yeah.
that housing allowance.
okay. All right.
Sorry. I
Oh,
found them. They were in a box
thank you.
underneath another box.
Thank you. Now, this compensation planning guide is one of the really best pieces that Guidestone does. And I use it almost every conference that we do. And so let's just go to that page. I think it's page 12. Bottom of the page, it says step 1, the minister requests housing allowance. And then step 2, on the bottom of the next page, the church must officially approve and designate that as housing. And it should be done in writing so that there's proof. There's proof that the church approved that housing allowance. And in y'all's case, I do believe that you could have a procedure that's outlined in your policies, a simple procedure. We approve housing allowance on all eligible ordained ministers, and our executive pastor or administrator gives final approval to it. Something like that. And can change it. And then in some churches, The church might vote on it, or a committee might vote on it, and then the administrator can approve a change in the middle of the year. So y'all, the main thing is y'all have a process in place. Now, on page 14, I think it is, it gives you a chart of what the eligible housing allowance expenses are, and they include the principal and interest and taxes and insurance, that payment. It includes down payment, it includes utilities, furnishings, upkeep, maintenance, homeowners association dues. All those things are in that chart, and all those things could be totaled and requested as a housing allowance. And he can ask for a little bit more in case something happens during the middle of the year. It's okay to ask for a little bit more. I've just got to know that if I don't spend it on housing, then I'm going to have to declare that difference as taxable income. That's what I'm going to have to do. A lot of our churches don't realize all the components of housing allowance, and that it includes all those things. All right? Let me point out one more thing in compensation planning guide. And you'll want, if you've been through this a bunch of times, that's okay. But if you haven't, you'll want to read this booklet because it's very good. It's very good. And let me just hit a couple more highlights. Let's go backwards. Page 8, bottom of page 8. It's got a caution triangle there. Bottom of page 8, it says that we're talking about ministry business expenses. And it says caution, and this is according to IRS code. These expenses must come from church budget, church money, church funds. It cannot come from salary reduction. So you've got to set up a budget for the reimbursement of business expenses. So I wanted to point out to you that on that page. And so then I wanted to point out the housing allowance. I think that's the main things that I wanted to point out to you. You're probably familiar with most of the rest of it, but this is your homework assignment. Do read the rest of this book because it is very good. It's very well done. Oh, I know there's one more thing I want to point out in the book. Page 11, I think it is. We're talking about benefits and talking about retirement plan. Your church will want to be involved in the church retirement plan through Guidestone. Because of a number of reasons. And have I got the right page here? I think it's page 11.
Yes.
Talks about the retirement plan. Okay, number one, they do a good job with our money. Number one, they do a good job. They're competitive even with secular companies. Also, they honor our values. They don't invest in companies having to do with gambling and tobacco and alcohol and pornography and abortion, and actually a couple more that we haven't really talked about. They don't invest in companies known to be involved in payday lendings also, because we would find that morally objectionable. So, and even with all that, they still are competitive with secular companies in their investments. Another reason is that a minister can save on all three taxes contributing to the church retirement plan. So you save on your federal, you save on your state, save on your Social Security taxes by contributing to the church retirement plan. And then the next benefit is that I can save traditionally for a lot of my money, most of my money, all of my money in the traditional method, meaning that I'm saving on taxes now. And then one day when I do retire, I can use a lot of that money, up to all of that money, for a housing allowance that is tax-free. Tax-free. So I put it in saving on taxes, let it grow tax deferred, and normally when I would be paying taxes on it someday, I take it out tax free. That is great. Now, I have not started drawing, let me just tell you an example here. I've not started drawing my retirement yet from Guidestone since I'm still working and I have started Social Security. So between the two of those, that's okay for our normal budget. So we have pulled out a little bit of money for some trips and things, but I'm not receiving my retirement money monthly yet. And when I do, I'm going to have a little bit more money coming to me than I actually need in housing allowance. And so the rest of that, so the first part for housing allowance will come to me tax-free. And then I'm going to have more that would normally be taxable. But these days, the way they've changed it, it's probably going to be within the standard deduction, especially with this enhanced standard deduction for people over 65. So anyway, that is a great benefit. That is a great benefit. And your ministers in retirement are not going to be paying very much in taxes as a result of it. Okay? So make sure they're involved in the Guidestone retirement plan, and make sure that your ministers, or I'm talking about ordained ministers, make sure that the first part of their money is going in the traditional way. I hear from ministers they've got their own IRA. Well, that's costing them more in taxes now because they're having to pay self-employment tax on that money, and then because it's a deduction, it's not something that was done by the employer. And then second, I won't be able to use that IRA for housing allowance when I do retire someday. So it's costing me tax-wise both ways. I hear from some ministers, oh, I have a Roth IRA. Well, Roth that's a great thing to do, but not necessarily for an ordained minister. You want to have your first money going to the church retirement plan through Guidestone. And then if you're doing real well with your saving, then you might want to do some Roth money in addition to that. But you want to have a significant amount of your money going traditionally into the church retirement plan through Guidestone. And by the way, Guidestone does have Roth version of their retirement. So you can do the Roth if you want to, or if you want to do part of it as Roth, you can. But I wanted to point out this page, page 11, because that is very, very important. And I'm seeing a lot of ministers doing it really incorrectly in my mind. There was a church that I talked to, they'd gotten a company to do their retirement for them. And I think it was a 401k. And, so they went to a lot of effort, they went to some expense, and then that minister is not going to be able to use that for housing allowance someday. So you need to do it through Guidestone and through the church retirement plan. Does that make sense? I wanted to point that part of it out because I do see some who are making that mistake. All right, any other questions about compensation planning guide? I have skipped through it. I didn't intend to do the whole thing, but I did want you to see some key points out of the planning guide. All right, so developing a personnel manual is in page section 7. And so there is a sample there. It's a pretty good sample. You want to, don't just copy that sample, but develop it for your church, and you work on your personnel manual so that you're doing a good job for your benefit of your employees. And Don't just copy one from another business or church. There was a church that had a manual that was 65 pages long. And when I was reading through it, I discovered they had copied the personnel manual from like Auburn University. And there were some things in there that were actually illegal for them to do. You know, our work week is a 40-hour work week, 7-day, 40-hour work week. But universities and hospitals can do a different, I think they can do a 2-day, 80-hour period. And so some things like that, you can't do that as a church. You need to have some good source material and not just copy what somebody else has done. Plus, that made the personnel manual so terribly cumbersome, it was too complicated for a church situation. So be careful. Don't copy from government agencies because their things are different. And for example, I've had this question fairly often: are we required to get to go out and solicit applications for this job? No, you're not. You know, you're not a government contractor, and so you're not required to. Okay, now let's take a break, and let's take a 5-minute break. Then we're going to come back and talk about the legal issues. That'll be our main thing for the rest of the session. But let's take a 5-minute break. Then we're going to talk about legal issues, and that's really an important part of what we want to talk about today. So let's take a 5-minute break. Probably should have done this part first. More fresh.
You had mentioned positions are harder to fill, youth ministers or music directors. So we were looking at hiring an associate pastor that could do associate pastor and youth or associate pastor and music. Does that make it more complicated to find somebody or easier?
What the associate pastor part, what are you expecting? Are you thinking more pastoral care? Are you thinking more administration? What are you thinking?
Not administration, more pastoral duties, like preaching and visiting with pastoral duties.
Okay,
More than
that may work out. That may work out now.
You know, are there any people out there looking for that kind of role to fill?
There's not a lot.
So it's
There's not a lot. And one thing that I would say is find the right person. Find the right person, and then
that's the challenge.
even if you need to adjust some of the ways that you do things. Like, say they're great at youth ministry and maybe not so great at the the pastoral care stuff. Well, you can help them to be better at that, and so you kind of hire for who they are first, and then you might be able to help them get some training about the other part. That's it. It is going to be a little bit hard to find.
About internships.
That can be good.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that can be a good thing.
Sometimes that turns into a job interview when you see
Yeah.
people work.
Yeah, that's true.
I've done that in prior job setting that worked out pretty good actually.
Yeah.
Not in a church setting, but outside.
In fact, let's ask that question of the group about internships and also about developing say a youth minister, children's minister from within your church. And I'm curious to see how many have done that
Good.
in their experience. But that's good.
Unless So you gotta be happy with some of these new laws. I could hear you silently cheering.
Well,
That's not
yeah,
for sure. Well,
from what I did was right before we came, well, we had already moved here, but before I started working. Maybe even before I came, I don't remember. But anyway, my wife has a cousin who was the chief executive financial officer for Coca-Cola nationally. So he told me to send me everything, and I'll figure out what, if you will have tax, if you won't have tax. Yeah, so, so what I found, figured out was, he told me to take $3,000 a year for taxes, but I would get it back, which I did. Matter of fact, I actually got back more than 3,000. So this year I was like, get that more because of the extra.
So he said he was gonna come to French, and when I watched him last night, he said,
Because he was like,
"Hey, it's still there, so
really
I think
nothing
that
we
he's
have
gonna
is taxable.
But she did.
And Social Security is not taxed.
well, so that part didn't,
They went hunting again, huh?
they didn't test that. They never tested it.
Maybe so, maybe they did, but.
And they got the 6.
You got the 6,000 to cover that, yeah. So.
You don't have to worry about that. So you part of my $500 every year, or is that every 5 years?
Every 2 weeks.
That would be nice, but I have never got like a pastor appreciation.
So you run payroll on Wednesday and
Tuesday
I never
usually,
got.
but since I've got the
No,
mom,
no,
I'm sure
no.
they have to do that. I'm not sure like me and mine goes in on Wednesday, or, the church is back until Friday.
Well, one time,
Wow.
when Mary and I had our 25th anniversary,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah. If I sit, am I too low for the camera?
Nope, you're fine.
Okay, good.
So it's that, or,
Here's the thing, you know, well, sort of, because the actual hotel was, somebody had gotten one of those sales. So we had to go to the sales meeting, you know, but we had 4 days in the hotel. Yeah, so it was pros and cons.
you were punished.
We were punished for an hour. But, you know, and, we even took the guy up front, hey, this was a gift.
I think she
for us,
does.
and we had no desire
Sure
to
what
buy
she
her
does.
time series. Yeah. Oh, you got it.
There's not a lot going on.
But, other than that, we never got any time.
Staff turnover, that's when
Now, we're not left in church. They took up the volunteer. He gave us $2,000. But that was after we had 25 years. And most of that probably didn't come
Dilly come on.
from my church members, it came from my friends who came to the celebration. I mean, we had, like I said, we were normally running about 25 at that time. We had 150 in church that day. Yeah.
All right, let's
Especially.
get started again. Let me ask you a question before we get started into the legal part. How many of you, we need to, well, and I'll tell you, we need to develop ministers. There's a conference called Calling Out the Called that's done by the State Board of Missions and through the student ministry and things like that, it's very, very important. And I think maybe some of it was a result of Jesus movement and some things like that. But when I was coming along, there was really kind of a surplus of ministers, and it was a little bit hard to find a job. But these days there's a need for ministers, and especially in some of our associations, in smaller churches, there's a real need, a real lack for ministers, and they're hunting and looking and praying for those ministers. So, how are we developing the next generation? And so let's talk about a couple of those things. How many of y'all do internships? Okay, a bunch of you. And do you do an internship helping a minister? Do you do that kind of internship?
Yes.
What, youth minister or children or
We have both.
both? Okay. And is that something you do on a regular basis for summer or a year or a semester or
Usually a year
usually a year? Okay.
and tied to a need base.
Okay. Sounds good. What do y'all do for?
We have some that support our student ministry, and we have some that support our missions ministry.
Okay.
And they're typically seasonal.
Okay. So internships are a way that we can help in looking at the next generation. Now, those interns, we do need to be careful about the way that we pay them. And I do want to mention that. You can't just have them work full-time all summer, not get paid, and then pay them $500. That's not, I mean, you just made them an employee. If you want them to be a volunteer, keep them a volunteer. Don't pay them. But if you want to pay them, you've got to follow the law in terms of minimum wage and all those kinds of things. So do, be careful. But internships, that's a wonderful way to develop the next generation of ministers. What about, how many of y'all have developed a minister from within? I'm talking about, like, say, a children's ministry, and there's one person who is just very, very involved in the children's ministry, and they become a leader, and then they, kind of do this and that, and they're doing more, and then you one day you call them to be your children's minister because you've developed them into that kind of a leader. How many of y'all have done that? How many of y'all have done that? Just a couple. I see that fairly often. I see that fairly often, and I think that's a method that we have used. I think it's a method that we need to look at in terms of developing some additional minister leadership. Anybody else have an experience in that, in developing a new leader, new becoming minister for your church? Okay. I was curious about what y'all's experience had been about that. All right, so let's talk about the fun part. Let's talk about legal issues. So we need to really do screening and supervision. Both are really important. So we need proper screening so that we're not negligent in our hiring, and then not negligent in our supervision of that person, and not negligent by keeping someone that we shouldn't have kept. So, and I'll just relate this to child sexual abuse. So you need to do background checks, you need to do references. I think that it is a good idea to do that training, so both with prospective ministers and with your main volunteers, so that they know how sexual predators work. And we let any potential person know, yes, we know how that works. So if you're a potential predator, you probably shouldn't come here. And so we don't want to be negligent in those areas. There have been some churches that have known something bad happened but did not address it. And bad happened. The worst of all that ever could happen would be, child sexual abuse. That would be the worst. And in Richard Hammer's view, it's usually number 1 or number 2 in his top 10 list of reasons the church, has a major lawsuit problem. And so that would be worse, but more commonly is the affair. And the fact there's been 2 ministers that I've known of that had an affair with a young lady who had just graduated from high school, and it was basically child sexual abuse, but that was not a child anymore, which was sad. It was really sad, and that person ended up at another church, serving at another church. So we need to be very careful. Now, while I'm mentioning that, I'll mention Alabama now has a law that a minister cannot have sex with anybody under the age of 19 in Alabama. And so basically it's like the school teachers, a school teacher, that made the news a lot for a number of years, that school teacher had sex with their student. And sometimes those students were of age. Age in Alabama is age 16, age of consent. And so prior to that law, there were people who said, well, it was consensual, but when it's talking about that kind of an age difference, it's really not. And so Alabama has first made the law for the teachers. Now they've made that law for ministers, that basically you cannot have sex with your student. And in this case, your pastor or other minister on staff cannot have sex with it's not a minor anymore. It's like an 18-year-old, 17, 18. They are of age consent-wise, but now that's against the law. So, and it should be. So some of those situations, that person ended up at another church and things like that. So we don't want to be negligent in those events. All right, labor laws, age discrimination is the law. So we're on page 42. Might be 44.
44.
Age discrimination. Now, for your pastor, you can say, Pastor, you're getting too old. We think that you should resign. He doesn't really have any rights. And I'm talking about ministers in that sentence. But your minister doesn't really have any rights in this sense, but your other workers do. You cannot fire that church secretary because church secretary's gotten too old. You can't now. So what you've got to do, if that person cannot perform their job anymore, you have to make it based on the performance of the job. You're not able to do this job requires this, and you're not able to perform at that level. This job requires that you be able to lift 50 pounds because you're the church custodian and you're not able to do that anymore. That sort of thing. So do not base it on age. Base it on their ability or not ability to perform their duties. And you do not want an age discrimination lawsuit. Equal opportunity, Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so the religious organizations, including churches, do have the right to discriminate on the basis of religion. Now, the store, the grocery store, the drugstore, the plant that builds Toyotas, things like that, they cannot discriminate on those bases, but the church can discriminate on the basis of religion. Now, make sure that you do base it on religion. So there have been instances, and for us, this comes into some of those things that we consider morally wrong. And so you find out that you've got someone who is now in a gay marriage and that sort of thing. You believe that that is wrong and you want to terminate that person. You've got to make it based on religion. You have a young lady that is working in your daycare ministry, and you find out she's living with her boyfriend, and you think that's wrong. Now, some churches have tried to work with that situation and keep them employed and try to help them, to understand what is biblically correct and wrong and things like that. Some churches have wanted to terminate that person. That's differences in how our churches operate sometimes. But if you're going to terminate, you need to do it because of what the Bible says. And also, let's say that her boyfriend is employed by the daycare too. Well, you don't terminate her and not terminate him. You've got to do this correctly, and you do it based on religion. And some courts, let's say that you find out that your janitor is Hindu, and you want to fire that janitor because he's Hindu. Well, some courts have said you can't do that because being Hindu has nothing to do with it in terms of the job. They're not your minister. They're not your pastor or teacher. And so some courts have said you can't fire that person. And then, in some churches you might hire that person knowing that all along. And that's okay with you because that's the job they do. They do the custodial work. So anyway, what I'm saying in all of these is be careful. And if you are going to terminate someone, be careful that you do it because of religion and not because of some incorrect reason. And make sure that you're also consistent in your application of the religious values to your hiring practices. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, Fair Labor Standards Act, that you must pay at least minimum wage to all non-exempt workers. You must pay overtime for anybody who works over 40 hours if they are non-exempt. Now, typically in church, your non-exempt workers are your secretarial staff, custodial staff, people like that. One of the most common reasons that we have for an exempt, the most common reason we have for an exempt worker is a minister. And this person does not have to be ordained, they just have to be a minister by job description. And so that person is exempt. And then typically in a church, the ministers are exempt, the non-ministers are non-exempt. That's what typically happens. Now, among this group over here, you might have someone who supervises others, and that might be a reason that they are exempt, because they supervise others. But also, in addition to having a reason to be exempt, they've also got to make $684 per week or more in order to remain exempt. Now, not last summer, but the summer before, I was telling you that number is going up to $1,100 a week, and it was headed that way. It made the trip to $800 and something a week, and it was about to be approved for the $1,100 a week, and a court in Texas overturned it. So we're back down to the $684 per week is the amount that that an exempt worker must make to remain exempt. Now, that does not apply to your ministers. your ministers could make $300 a week, they're part-time, and, and that's still acceptable. They can still work 80 hours that week, taking the kids to camp, and you don't have to pay them anymore. They are exempt, even if they don't make that much. But let's say you have a daycare director. That daycare director's got to, and you're considering that person exempt, then that person's got to make $684 per week or more to be exempt. If they make less, they're not exempt and they're subject to overtime pay. So be careful about the Fair Labor Standards Act. And one more thing about Fair Labor Standards Act, you need to be careful about what your non-exempt workers do in terms of volunteering. They need to volunteer in an area that's not part of their job. So if your church secretary is also the church clerk, then you need to pay for that. If your church secretary comes on Sunday morning to volunteer to run the copier for Sunday school teachers, you need to pay for that. They need, if they're really truly involved in your church, they want to be a volunteer, they need to volunteer in something else. They could volunteer to sing in the choir, they could volunteer to teach preschool, or they could volunteer to do something else. But if they volunteer in the same area that is their job description, then you need to pay them for what they're, quote, volunteering to do. Okay? Everybody on board with that? Y'all okay? So be careful about the Fair Labor Standards Act. One more thing, a definition of a minister. We're talking about Department of Labor. A minister is a minister by job description. They do not have to be ordained. And you want your ministers to be a minister by job description. Some of our churches, and I'll just take children's minister. Some of our churches call that children's director. And it's okay, it doesn't matter what you call them. But even if you call them children's director, have a ministerial job description for that person. And so I had a tax attorney person who was teaching a seminar, and he said, in a nutshell, it is they impart the faith. They impart the faith. And so what he meant by that is you have a job description. You, as a children's director, you teach God's Word. You teach children about Jesus. You teach children the Bible. You help children to understand about their faith. You teach the teachers how to teach the Bible. You help the parents to understand what it is to bring up their children in the ways of the Lord. Those kinds of things are your job description. Now, yes, you're going to have some stuff in there about, you order the literature and you take the kids on outings and take them bowling and that sort of stuff. But the main thrust of the job description is those ministerial duties, and those are ministerial duties. Make sure that you write that in. And here's where it makes a difference. If you don't have a ministerial job description and that person is the children's director and they don't have a job description that's ministerial, they take the kids to camp and they work 80 hours that week, and you need to pay them for all those 80 hours. But if they have a ministerial job description, you don't have to pay them anything other than the ordinary salary that they receive. So you really want to do that. I had one church that I explained that, and they said, no, we still don't want to make that person a minister. Even in that, and I said, okay, we just pay the overtime. Okay, everybody on board with that one? Fair Labor Standards Act. It does apply to our churches in certain ways. All right, next one. Let's see. We talked about volunteering. Okay. There are some other ways to be exempt. Do any of y'all have any of the, I mentioned supervising at least 2 other full-time employees. Do any of y'all have any other ways that people are exempt in your church? Other than being that or being a minister?
We have the professional exemption where we have
Okay.
people who are in skilled crafts like
Yeah,
production or graphic design.
okay, all right. And then they have to make $684 a week or more. Okay, I did want to mention this about, I mentioned it a little bit ago, group medical insurance, that if you can provide group medical insurance, that's the best way to go for your staff. And then those of you who have 50 or more employees, you have to. But if you can't provide health insurance, and some of our churches can't, then you can provide, you can provide a qualified small employer HRA. You got to do it according to the rules. This is when people get their own insurance, and you're just helping them with that. And you do it according to the rules. You've got to make it available to anybody who works 30 hours a week or more. You have to have a written plan about it, and it cannot be from salary reduction. That you can provide a reimbursement to help them with their health insurance. And each year there's an amount that you can go up to that amount. Last time I looked at it, it's like 12,000 something was the amount you could reimburse. So there are some ways to help your people with their health insurance even when you can't pay for it all. And so be aware of those. And then there's another one called individual coverage HRA. And that's also one that could be helpful when you can't provide, just flat out provide their health insurance. But you'll need an expert to help you with that, help you work through it, and to know the rules and to know if it works in your situation. Okay, OSHA, page 42, that'd be about page 44. And of course, this is occupational safety. The main thing that I see OSHA involved is when, number one, for your custodial workers, they've got to have their safety data sheets for like their custodial supplies and stuff, and especially if they're mixing chemicals. And then mixing chemicals, that's that and falls. Your custodial staff are the most susceptible to an OSHA problem. And it could be that we had a lady a long time ago that was mixing chemicals, and she thought, well, if the instructions say 8 ounces, 16 ounces will do better. And she actually created something that burned her skin. But so that and having those data sheets, those are the main reasons that you might have an OSHA violation. And if somebody's hurt on the job, OSHA could question that. Did you do the right things in providing for the safety of that person? But have y'all had OSHA come into your church? And no? Okay. We just want to keep it that way. All right.
We had an incident, but it wasn't on us, it was on the contractor where a guy fell off the roof.
Oh, wow.
And it
Wow.
was that they were investigating that contractor.
That contractor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. You're just really glad when they're not investigating us. But you do want to be cautious of these kinds of issues and requirements. Okay, immigration law. We in Alabama, we've got to do both the I-9 and E-Verify. And both of those, if you read all the instructions about E-Verify, it talks about it being voluntary, but it is required by Alabama law. So we've got to do both. And the I-9 you'd want to keep on file. The E-Verify is sent in electronically only for a new employee, and so that it's the I-9 that you actually keep. Family Medical Leave Act. Family Medical Leave Act, it requires up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for family medical emergencies. And if you have 50 or more employees, you're required to provide this. If you have less than 50, there are a lot of churches that are saying we voluntarily, participate in the Family Medical Leave Act. Just voluntarily, we will provide up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. But if you don't have 50 employees and you're not required to do it, I'd suggest don't use that terminology. Don't say we copy the Family Medical Leave Act. Just simply say we provide up to 12 weeks of family medical emergency unpaid leave. And kind of be watching for what's going on in that. Federal government employees made it paid recently. And I've known of two. My son-in-law works for the government. In fact, my daughter and son-in-law work for the government. And then another friend who works for the government. And when they had their babies, and this applied to our youngest grandson, then he had up to 12 weeks of paid leave. That just kind of blows my mind. But now my son-in-law, he took some of it, but he didn't take all of it, and he got paid. And then this other guy, he took it every Friday. He took it every Friday until it ran out. And so he had the equivalent of 12 weeks of paid leave. And, it wasn't his baby, it was her baby. The dad, the father got that leave. That one blew my mind. But, so watch this sort of thing. The law could change. It could change. I don't anticipate it to change, but it could. And I think it's good to provide unpaid leave if necessary, but I hope that it doesn't become mandatory that we provide paid leave. Not that much. I think we should be generous in sick leave and vacation leave and all those things, but not this much additional. Okay. If you do provide it, then you would keep that job open or a equivalent job open. You are required, if you're going to follow it, or if you're required to follow it, then you do have to keep their insurance going, if they have insurance. Workers' comp. If you have 5 employees, now those can be anybody, 5 employees, you must provide workers' comp. And that could be that you've got 3 ministers and 2 nursery workers. You've got to do workers' comp. It's 5 full-time, part-time, anybody, then you must provide workers' comp. But we recommend that you'd want to provide workers' comp anyway. That if something should happen to somebody on the job and you didn't have workers' comp, then you would have to provide what workers' comp would have done. When they go to the hospital, they're going to be asked, was this as a result of an accident at work? And they're going to say yes. Then they're going to contact you and they're going to say, give us your workers' comp number, that sort of thing. And you're going to say, well, we don't have workers' comp. You're going to have to pay for it. Insurance is not going to pay for it. And your liability insurance is not going to pay for it. It's going to be you, the church, you'll pay for it if you don't have that insurance. And so even if you've got 3 or 4 employees, we would strongly recommend that you get workers' comp. For our workers, it's relatively inexpensive. Clerical workers, ministers, people like that, it's relatively inexpensive. Workers' comp, the premium is based on how dangerous is that job and how much did they get paid. And then there's a formula for what the premium is for that workers' comp insurance. So obviously a roofer is really expensive because they tend to fall off the roof. But for a coal miner, I think that's one of the most expensive ones. But for our workers, it's not quite so expensive. Our most expensive workers' comp person is custodial, anybody in that realm, because they have back injuries, they hurt themselves, they slip and fall, things of that nature. But it's relatively inexpensive for secretarial staff and ministerial staff. Now, for all those people that you have that are contract workers, then you'll need to ask them, do you have workers' comp insurance? Because in the end, if they don't have workers' comp insurance, you're going to pay for it. Like say your person who cuts the grass and it's just a mom and pop operation and they don't have workers' comp and they get hurt on the job, well, you're going to pay workers' comp insurance for that person. Your insurance company is going to, well, even if they don't get hurt on the job, you're going to pay that premium. Your insurance company is going to ask you for all your 1099s, and they're going to add those up, and what kind of business do they do? What's the factor, that multiplication factor, and figure out how much you owe in premium for the workers' comp for that person who wasn't even your employee, if they don't have it. So we recommend that you have workers' comp insurance, even if you don't have 5 employees. Termination should, like we talked about earlier, should not be a surprise, should be well documented, should have a witness present, and should provide 2 weeks' pay or more, depending on circumstances, or more. And you would pay for unused vacation, but you would not pay for unused sick time, things like that. Any of y'all do paid time off, PTO? If somebody leaves, do you pay them for all their PTO?
We do.
Okay, yeah. I thought that'd be the case. All right.
Yeah, was that term about taking?
Page 46. These are frequent grounds for a lawsuit. That you didn't conduct based on conduct not specified in the personnel handbook. You fire somebody without followed procedure, or let's say that in your personnel handbook you call for a procedure of 3 times and you fire them on the 3rd time and you didn't do that. Or now there in your personnel book, if you want to go into that kind of detail, there should be some things that are terminable immediately, like insubordination, like lying, like stealing, like any kind of violence or assault or anything like that would be reason for immediate termination. But other things, you should have a process, and if you want to, you can outline that we will follow a process of correcting the behavior or of work, and then we'll give you 60 days to correct those things, and then we're going to look at the possibility of termination. If you can get into lawsuit because you violated the law, you violated a procedure in your own manual, or defamation, or invasion of privacy. Those are some of the most common. Richard Hammer puts out a list every year and of top 10 reasons churches end up in court. And in recent years, it's been child sexual abuse, and then right up near the top of the list, a long time ago it was slips and falls. That was number 1. But in more recent years, it's been child sexual abuse, and then near the top of the list Actually, a lot of the lawsuits are employment related. Employment, that you didn't fire them correctly. You fired them for age, and it was age discrimination. You fired somebody that was pregnant. You did a wrongful firing of somebody. So employment practices is way up there in reasons that churches end up in court, and so you don't want to do that. You want to be careful about these things. Okay? And then payroll taxes, you must do your payroll taxes properly. And if you don't, for your non-ministers, you are required to withhold taxes. You're required to withhold and match FICA. And if you don't do those things properly, the pastor and the person who did it, like financial secretary, treasurer, somebody like that, could be held personally liable for those taxes. And so you don't want to ever be guilty of that. Your personnel files should have W-4 and A-4. And if your ministers want to write do not withhold, they can. I'm talking about ordained ministers. But your other people, they fill out the W-4 properly, and you do have to withhold if the tables call for withholding. And you do have to do, even a nursery worker that works 2 hours a week, you've got to at least do FICA on that person. A4 is the Alabama form. You need to have an I-9 in their personnel file. And then E-Verify and New Hire, those are only if it's a brand new employee. And you would do those two. And those two are done electronically. The New Hire form, that's for Alabama. And if they have been on some kind of, they got unemployment benefits, the New Hire form would cause them to come off of that. It's also the way that Alabama tracks down deadbeat dads and stuff like that. So that's what that form is for. I-9 and E-Verify are just to see if a person is legally able to work in Alabama, well, in the U.S. All right, so these are some of the things that should be in the personnel file. In your packet, well, I'm mentioning W-4. In your packet, you've got a minister estimated tax form and how they can estimate their taxes. Now, let me tell you right off the bat, this form is wrong. Intentionally, this form is wrong. I wanted it to fit on one page, and that's the only way I could do it. If the IRS developed this form, it would be at least 10 pages. So, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you right now what I did wrong. So, for a minister, an ordained minister, you take your salary but not housing, and then you determine what is the filing status, whether that is married filing jointly or single, and then from that you would take that salary and you would subtract the standard deduction, whether that's $31,500 because you're married or what, and then you would determine what is left that is taxable and multiply that by 0.12, 12%. Now here's one thing I did wrong. I skipped the 10% and went on to the 12% because I figured the two are pretty close together. It's going to make you estimate just a little bit high, but that's okay. It's not going to be a whole lot high. It's going to be a little bit high. And so I skipped on to the 12% bracket, and then you figure the federal tax based on 12%, after you've subtracted the standard deduction. And the second thing that I did that's wrong on this form is I did not go on to the 22% bracket. This will cover, depending on how much your housing allowance is, say for an ordained minister, this will cover up to about maybe 100 and, let's see, 20, maybe 100 and maybe even $140,000 still in the 12% bracket because of housing allowance. Now I'm just kind of estimating in my head here. So you'll have to look at your situation. So here's what I'm saying. If your family income is more than about 140 with the housing allowance, then you need to take a look at the 22% tax bracket and multiply some of that money times 0.22 rather than 0.12. Now, do y'all understand how the way tax brackets work? I've had some people refuse a raise because it's going to put them in the next tax bracket. Can I say something here? That's not very smart. That's not very smart. If you go in the 22% tax bracket, that doesn't mean that all of your money is at 22%. It just means that the amount over a certain level is at 22. Other parts you've got at 12%, 10%, and even 0% because of the standard deduction. So anyway, if your family income is more than that, you might have to consider the 22% tax bracket for that extra money, but this should suffice for a lot of people who are not yet going to be in that 22% tax bracket. So there's two things wrong with the form. I just told you what they are. Then you calculate the SE tax, and that calculation is exact that I have there for you on the page. You add those two together and it comes up with your total tax. And from that total tax, the minister can divide that by 4 and send in 4 quarterly estimated payments, or they can divide it by the number of paychecks that you do at your church, and then they can have that withheld, but they need to withhold it only as federal income tax. You cannot do FICA on an ordained minister. And so you've got that sheet in your packet. So personnel files. Other labor laws, sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a very specific law. It specifically deals with workers at a workplace, and typically somebody in authority over another person wants some kind of sexual favors in order, and there's a hint at to keep your job or to be promoted or to do well at your job or things like that. So that's the definition of sexual harassment. And you need to have, you can probably get your insurance company or somebody to give you one of those little videos to show your employees, to tell them what sexual harassment is and how to understand it. There is a sample policy that's pretty typical about we don't condone or support or we won't tolerate any kind of sexual harassment. And in your policy, you need a procedure if there's a grievance, and here's the procedure that they do. And here at the State Board of Missions, we had a situation a while back where it wasn't an employee, it was a vendor. And we included vendor in our definition of sexual harassment, that will not be tolerated. So you need a policy about that. Churches are excluded from COBRA. And now y'all tell me what's going on in COBRA. There for a while, long time, churches are excluded, but yet some churches were doing it because they just want to make sure that employee had insurance, and the insurance companies didn't seem to care. But now, is that more strictly? Are the insurance companies telling you no? They They don't participate in COBRA? Are the insurance companies allowing them to participate in COBRA? What are you seeing?
We do COBRA, but I thought we had to.
You don't, church is excluded, but sometimes it happens because they just allow it to happen. So it's not required, but it's allowed. And I'm just kind of curious about whether that's going to go away someday. And go away in the standpoint of the church being able to do it. But it's not actually required by law. Unemployment tax we don't pay, and Alabama unemployment tax we don't pay. But that also means that they don't get the benefit either, the unemployment benefit, if they should be laid off by the church. Child labor law, if you're going to hire someone under 18 or under, you need to be careful about that. And there's a way to do it where you become certified. And becoming certified just means that you know the law and you're going to follow the law. And so for 14 and 15-year-olds, it's pretty restrictive. They can only work 3 hours a day on a school night. They can't work past 7, things like that. For 15 and 16-year-olds, it's less restrictive. 16 and 17-year-olds, it's less restrictive. They can work till 10, and it's less restrictive than the other. But you need to know the law, and getting that certification proves that you know the law. Also, the other thing about child labor is you can't do a background check on a child, on a minor. You can try, but you're not going to get anything. And so you need to be aware of that.
Under legal issues, you have only 19-year-olds or older should work in childcare. So anyone 18 or younger should not work in supervision of children.
Well, basically they don't count in the ratios. Now, so what I'm saying is you could allow it, but they don't count in your ratios.
Okay.
They're a helper.
Okay.
And I've known many churches that have youth workers, and in fact I've known of churches that say we get teenagers to do our babysitting for our adult small groups. That's not good. That's not a good practice. That happens fairly commonly, and it's just not a good practice because, number one, they're not an adult. You don't have, in that case, you don't have a proper adult ratio. Your ratio, should be the adult ratio. You don't have a means to do a background check. You don't have proper supervision, and you don't have proper supervision regarding child sexual abuse, because child sexual abuse takes place with adults abusing children. That's the first thing that comes to our mind. But it also involves adolescents and children, or even older children and younger children. So in those situations, adolescents and children and older children and younger children, we've got to supervise those things. And I see that a lot where they'll hire youth as the child care workers, and I see a number of churches where they're the only ones, and it's just really not a good practice for many reasons. But they can be a helper in the situation, and you can pay them. But in my mind, they're just not part of the ratios, and they're not part of the 2 adult rule, and they're not part of this sort of thing. All right, good question. What about other questions? Y'all have been quiet today, and so therefore we're finishing up a little bit early. So final section, you'll want to read that section, working as a team, and you'll want to do some team building. How can we do team building? My church, they did an outing with the staff just the other night, and that was a good team building experience. I've seen churches, I've been at Heritage, I know, did some team building activities, do a staff retreat, do things to build your team and to help your team, not only to enhance their ministry and their skills and knowledge as a minister, but to enhance their working together as a team. And so work on that. What are some things that you've done team building wise that you really thought was good? Anybody?
Our group tries to make a big deal out of everybody's birthday.
Okay, good. That's a good one.
In the fall, we do lunches every Thursday, so somebody will do like a homemade soup or chili or something, and then we all sit and have lunch together.
Okay, that's a good idea. It's always good to get together.
We do monthly staff meetings where we have a worship time, and then we do, eat together. And then we have, like a chili cook-off once a year, and, for the staff, there's chili and desserts, and they judge, and you win gift cards and things like that. And we have a yearly Christmas party where all the staff comes together. There's one big staff for a Christmas party.
That is so good. That's so good. And the one that you mentioned about when we get together, we have a time of worship. I just think that's amazing because as staff, my wife did the children's ministry at our church, and I was always with adults, and I was the discipleship minister and always was with adults, and so we were at church. We were at church at the same time, but we were not together. She was doing her thing and I was doing my thing, and so I think it's good to worship together. I like that. I like that idea. Good ideas. We need to build the team. Staff retreat can be a good time to do it too. All right. So we have kind of finished early. We're going to have a prayer and dismiss us, but I'm going to be hanging around. And so anything that you want to talk about or anything question-wise or anything like that, I'll be glad to help. Father, thank you for today, and we just thank you for each person here today. Thank you for a good day, and thank you for the churches they represent. We just pray that you would be with each one and help them in all that they do. Help them to build a good team. Help them to encourage. Help them to help their ministers to see the good work that they're doing, to see the importance of it, to see the value of it, to see how it touches lives, to see how people are reached for the gospel. And we just ask that you help us as leaders and as committees and as leadership in the church to encourage and to encourage so that things will be done for the kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.